Hello and welcome everyone. We're excited to have you join our first onboarding session focused on Veeam backup and replication. I'm Nikita, part of the system engineers team at Renewals and Customer Success Department at Veeam Software. And today I've taken on the simplest task to share my knowledge and experience through the slides. And meanwhile, my colleague Elena will tackle the most challenging questions in the Q&A section. Elena, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Nikita. My name is Elena and I'm a system engineer here at Veeam Software. Today, I'm going to handle all of your questions. So just feel free to use chat, feel free to use Q&A section. And just, I'm really ready. So let's make me busy with the question today. Thank you.
Yeah, all right, thank you. This session is the pilot of our Vim backup and replication training series. And while I'll do my best to stick to the schedule, please bear with me as we have really a huge amount of material to cover. A few housekeeping rules, a few housekeeping items. The session is being recorded and you will receive the recording in a few days. So I guess just in a couple of days. However, I encourage you not to rely on the recording for later viewing because right here and right now, again, you have a unique opportunity to ask any questions you may have and get real-time answers from an experienced Veeam engineer. Believe me. And so take advantage of this live interaction. The mics and cameras are disabled, so please use the Q&A box, the question box for your questions. And also you will have fantastic opportunity to test your knowledge post training because we have prepared a quiz for you, and the link we're going to share the link to the quiz later on, just after the training session, alongside with our contact, so you can reach out to us after the meeting, after the session. And again, should any questions arise during the quiz or after the presentation, after our onboarding session, we'll be more than happy to assist and guide you. So once again, we're really thrilled to have you with us today, and we're looking forward to an interactive session. So let's do it. A quick agenda. So today we will cover a wide range of topics structured to give you a really solid understanding of Veeam backup and replication. Just give me a second. I need to double check. Let me double check. Can you please tell me if you can see my screen, if you can see the presentation, because that is really important. Let me maybe reshare the screen. Just a sec. I go to the platform. Let me reshare it. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. That is a technical webinar, so we experience some technical issues, as always. Share it again. Please let me know if you can. Yeah, thumbs up. Thanks. Nice. So, okay, that was the first slide. So nothing really important here, just our pictures. So agenda. So we're gonna focus again on Veeam backup and replication, and we have a lot of topics structured to give you a solid understanding of Veeam backup and replication. And here's what we're going to discuss. So introduction, that's just a single slide to cover an overview of the Veeam data platform. Next, we'll dive into the architecture, highlighting the core components, software components that make up the foundation of the platform of Veeam backup and replication. Then we will explore some advanced features available to you and discuss some optional components that can enhance your experience and give more features and functions to Veeam backup. And number four, general product configuration. We will learn how to configure the product. Number five, jobs. We together will understand the concept of backup jobs, backup policies, how to configure them for optimal performance, and dive into different flags, options, configurations, etc. Number six, recovery. So definitely we are performing backup, not to create backups, but to be able to recover our data. So in the recovery section, we will review some of the powerful recovery capabilities, ensuring that you can recover data when needed. Number seven, security. An in-depth look at some of the security features of latest and greatest Veeam Backup and Replication build 12.1. Then some tips and tricks. And the last one is additional resources. So finally, we will provide a list of additional resources for learning and support. So our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and skills needed to effectively use the solution. So let's dive in and let's start our first introduction section. And here we will briefly touch again on just a single slide about Veeam Data Platform and then move on to Veeam Backup and Replication, discussing the platforms and versions that we currently support, as well as the crucial topic of licensing. So just an overview of the platform. The Veeam Data Platform featuring Veeam Backup and Replication we cover today in a more detail, offers data security, recovery, flexibility without any data lock-in across different landscapes, applications, hypervisors, etc. And the solution that is available in three editions, that is the Foundation, Advanced, and Premium, is designed to protect various applications from cloud and software as a service like M365 and Salesforce to Kubernetes and let's call them more traditional virtual environments like VMware, Hyper-V, Acropolis, Proxmox, Oracle Linux, and Red Hat. And in addition to those, we have persistent agents tailored for physical landscapes, for clusters, for physical servers, workstations, and laptops. Because when we speak about protecting virtual environments, we do not require to install any persistent agents inside guest operating systems. That's why I told that in comparison to physical world, we need some piece of code, piece of software to be installed on the endpoint to interact with. That's why we need some persistent agents. Moreover, we provide some dedicated plugins for databases such as Oracle database and Microsoft SQL database. So you can use the native tools like Recovery Manager for Oracle or SQL Studio for Microsoft SQL, with plans to extend support to MongoDB in the nearest future to protect your databases as well. And well, that ensures a comprehensive approach and data protection strategy across the entire diverse infrastructure. Veeam Backup and Replication also can be enhanced, empowered with Veeam One for monitoring and in-depth analytics of the production and backup environment. So it's kind of an umbrella to cover the production environment like Hyper-V or VMware or M365 and the backup solution as well, if that's Veeam, of course. And along with Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, that is a recovery orchestration tool that enables you to create and automate the recovery plans. Create workflows, test those in an isolation environment, and definitely run those plans when needed. So, and again, we're happy to answer all of your questions today about all our products around all platform, but try to keep focus on Veeam Backup and Replication because that is the main topic of our training today. So now we're switching to Veeam Backup and Replication version 12.1. So Veeam Backup and Replication is compatible with several platforms, including VMware vSphere versions 6 to 8, update 2, and update 3 is on the go, VMware Cloud on AWS, and VMware Cloud Director. And by the way, don't forget that we do not support FreeESXi due to VMware restrictions on vSphere APIs. They called vSphere API for data protection, and we use those to interact with the hypervisor, and we just don't have access to those in ESXi free. Veeam also supports the Microsoft Hyper-V platform, Azure, Stack, HCI, and offers solutions like Veeam Backup for Nutanix for HV environments, as well as Veeam Backup for Oracle Linux Virtualization Manager and Red Hat Virtualization for KVM environments. And by the way, we recently announced the upcoming support for Proxmox, and a beta version of this plugin has just been released I think in a couple of weeks ago. Extending our support for physical. So we have agents for physical infrastructure. Again, to protect physical machines, workstations, servers, clusters, laptops, etc., we need some persistent agent, some Veeam software to interact with on the endpoint. So that's why you need to install an agent, and you have a couple of options to install those. You can install it as a in a standalone mode. You can use the single UI to deploy your agents. You can use MDM solutions to deploy agents. So, well, a lot of options here. Um, Veeam Agent for Windows and Linux can be used to protect, again, clusters, failover clusters for Windows platform, as an example, SQL Always On, etc. And we do support a lot of different operating systems. So like Veeam Agent for Linux supports really a variety of major Linux distros such as Red Hat, Ubuntu Debian, Oracle Linux, Rocky Linux, Alma Linux. But just check the required distros in the user guide. And for Windows, we do support, again, a variety of Windows Server operating systems and several workstations as well. And alongside with those, we do support Mac OS, IBM AIX, and Oracle Solaris as well. And the last slide about the types of workloads, that's the unstructured data. So we also support backing up and recovering unstructured data, including SMB and NFS. So SMB versions 1 to 3 and NFS versions 3 and 4.1, as well as Windows and Linux file servers, different NAS devices, and object storage systems like S3 and Azure Blob. So imagine if you want to create a second copy of the data that's in S3 or in Azure, and you want to send it, let's say, to Wasabi or to any other S3 compatible storage, you can do it with Veeam. Just copy it from one blob to another. So summing up a little bit, we cover really a broad spectrum of workloads. And well, honestly, I remember Veeam when we covered just the virtual platforms, and now it is virtual, it is physical, cloud, software as a service, unstructured data, databases, and more. And to use Veeam, you need to install a license key. So otherwise, it defaults to the so-called free community edition with a limitation of 10 protected workloads. So you can just install it for free. And if you got 10 workloads, I mean, 10 virtual machines or 10 physical, you can just use it for free. And we have a couple of licensing modes. So the first one, we offer licensing by socket, instance, or and capacity, by the way, and capacity. And by the way, you need a license for backups, but not for restoration. Keep in mind, for instance, if you have backups, but do not have a commercial license, you can install Veeam in the community edition mode and restore your data. Remember, I told you that we do not lock your data in. That's an example. You can install Veeam and recover your data anytime. So let's start with a socket licensing. So socket licensing is based on the CPU sockets in use on the hosts, with licenses assigned automatically during backup or replication. And licenses, by the way, can be transferred between hosts, and this license type is limited to VMware and Hyper-V virtual machines only. So if you need to, in example, if you have some cluster configuration, you want to decommission a couple of old hosts, you want to migrate a virtual machine to a new cluster, you can revoke the license and just transfer them to a new cluster, to new hosts. That's the socket. So the socket one covers virtual machines. the second type of license, instance-based or Veeam Universal License. Um, that type of license can be used for protecting virtual, physical, or cloud workloads. So that's why it's called universal. So and you must obtain a license with a total number of workloads that you plan to protect in Veeam backup and replication. So as an example, I have 50 virtual machines on premises, and I have, let's say, 10 virtual machines in Azure. So combined, I need 40 licenses to cover those, and I can add more if I need to cover, let's say, some maybe physical workloads as well. And workloads that have been processed in the past 31 days are considered protected. So if I have a backup of that workload in the past 31 days, then it is protected, and that one consumes one universal license. And the last one, just a quick one, the capacity license goes by TBs, and that one is suitable for protecting unstructured data only. So for virtual machines, for physical, if you're using Veeam Universal License, we don't care if that's, I don't know, a big iron box with, let's say, 16 CPU and 2 terabytes of memory. That doesn't matter for us. That is just a single universal license. If that's just a single virtual machine, again, doesn't matter of the number of cores, RAM, and the data, volume of data, that's just a single license, universal license. And we offer two types of licensing for those, the so-called perpetual license and subscription license. So, well, the perpetual is ongoing, never expiring license, and it comes with a support, it comes with a maintenance period, often specified in years, with 1 year of support and maintenance commonly bundled. And subscription is, well, it's time limited. So I mean, that one expires when the subscription period ends, and again, typically ranging from 1 to 3, maybe 5 years from the date of license issue. So again, to summarize a little bit, so socket-based licensing is only for virtual machines, Hyper-V, VMware, while the universal license, that is a flexible option. So if you have a hybrid environment, or you plan to maybe migrate a couple of workloads to Azure, to Amazon, to any other public cloud, to the hyperscaler, the Veeam Universal License is a way to go. We don't anticipate many questions on this topic, but again, feel free to post some tricky ones. So, for instance, you might ask whether it's possible to combine different licenses. I mean, the universal and socket, or maybe how to migrate to universal license from socket. And so, well, let's keep Elena busy today. Next one, section number 2. Let's dive into the key elements of the platform. So we'll cover an overview of the components, walk through the installation process, how install Veeam backup and replication, examine the backup workflow, and break down some components in detail, and definitely discuss some design considerations. So let's begin with an overview of Veeam backup and replication components. And we get a couple of them. So again, Veeam backup and replication offers a flexible, scalable, and recovery solution for a variety of different setups, workloads, and environments. So it can be a really small installation combining all the components in an all-in-one installation, just using a single physical machine, but it can scale if needed to protect a huge, enormous enterprise installations with thousands of virtual machines, physical, and maybe some, and definitely some hybrid environments. So, and the installation includes some mandatory, some essential core components that you can see on the screen, and some optional components. So, I mean, when you perform the installation, those components that you can see on the screen are installed automatically. That is the backup server, the management machine, the backup proxy, the backup repository, and the UI, the console that is installed by default. But later, you can enhance the features. You can add more components, more software components to the installation. in example, you can, hey, I need to offload my data to tape. So, okay, you need to install tape role, some tape server. I want to perform continuous data protection replication for low recovery point objective. You can do so, but you need to install CDP proxy for that. So again, you can start small and then you can expand and scale out if needed. So components can be installed on one machine, again, physical, virtual, doesn't matter for us, or distributed across several systems for scalability, for performance, for high availability, etc. And those three, again, are installed by default. And now we're going to examine all of these components in detail. So, but let's explore the installation. So how to install the product. Um, so before installing Veeam Backup and Replication, please ensure that the installation machine aligns with the system requirements. The account has the necessary permissions and that the required ports, if you're using firewalls, and you should in production environment, definitely, are open. All the details can be found in the user guides, and we will share the links after the training. And well, the help centers are definitely worth reading when needed. Just give me a second. Yeah, much better. Um, Despite the fact that many or well, almost all Vim components can be installed on both Windows and Linux operating systems, the management machine still is Windows only. So please keep that in mind. If you attended the VMON that we held, I think a month ago, we announced that the management machine will be available on Linux as well, but that's coming in the next year. So we're migrating all of our components to Linux as well. Um, where to install it? Well, it depends. It depends on the protection strategy. So, I mean, if you plan to use replication or continuous data protection for disaster recovery, then install the management machine at the disaster recovery site. Or maybe you got some kind of a witness site for failover. So if you have issues, you can use Veeam Backup and Replication UI for failover, because if that's on the primary side and you get some issues, you can't fail over your virtual machines. But if you just have one site, one data center, so you're planning to use it for backups only, place the server at the production site. And then proceed to veeam.com to download the package and start the installation. So to install the management server and the mandatory components that are the default proxy and the default repository, um, you can install Veeam either by the setup wizard or unattended mode. So an example, if you have a couple of sites and you want to automate the installation, you can use just the answer file to speed up the installation of Veeam Backup and Replication. But if you have just one installation, just use the UI, use the graphical user interface. So we got the splash screen, select install Veeam Backup and Replication, and the UI, the console will be installed by default. It will be installed automatically. But again, for remote access, the UI can be installed on any other Windows machine, and the default UI can be uninstalled, well, if required. Next step, um, the licensing. So during the license step, just choose the Veeam Backup and Replication license, because again, you remember, without a license, the product defaults to the free community edition. And then the wizard performs a system configuration check, installing missing components automatically, and potentially requiring a reboot. So if automated installation fails, try to install the components and retry. And well, among the primary requirements are the .NET framework, PowerShell, and a couple of other components. Um, And that step, the system configuration check, is bypassed if all the software is pre-installed. Well, if we have everything we need, we just skip it. At the ready to install step, choose between default settings with just install button. So you can just go through the wizard with next, next, finish if you and stick with the defaults. But you can customize the settings with customize settings button. So, and the customizing includes a couple of additional steps, such as you can select the installation folder, vPower Cache, guest catalog folder, service account. By default, we're using the local system account, and the configuration database settings, and the authentication method as well for the database. And we're going to cover that in detail. By the way, if you have any questions regarding the installation process, please don't hesitate to ask in the Q&A section. So let's talk about configuration database. So Veeam Backup and Replication stores all the information about backup infrastructure, jobs, settings, history, sessions. So everything in a database that is often referred to as the configuration database. And starting with version 12, by default, we install PostgreSQL, but you have the option to switch to Microsoft SQL. So, and that decision to switch to Postgre was made because Microsoft SQL Express that was bundled before came with some limitations in terms of scaling, in terms of performance, etc. And Postgre just doesn't have these limitations, while it does not require a license. So uh, that's it. So now Postgre by default, but you can switch to Microsoft SQL. Um, a quick tip if you are running, but I think we will come back to that one when we will discuss the enterprise manager. If you have an environment, multiple Veeam backup and replication machines with Veeam Enterprise Manager that we will cover later, consider that all of them must use the same database engine. So the SQL database or Postgre database. And the migration of the database between SQL and PostgreSQL is possible, and vice versa. Um, the database can be set up locally on the backup machine or on a remote system, and in some cases remote DB over a local one may be preferable because of high availability. So you can use like Microsoft SQL clustering or always on groups for the configuration database, and the load distribution. So, well, sometimes hosting the database remotely can help prevent resource contention, and sometimes, just simplify the identification of performance bottlenecks between the Veeam backup and replication and the database. So if you have a huge environment, our recommendation is to split them up, separate them on different machines. And backing up the configuration database is how Veeam creates a backup of its own settings, which can be later restored or migrated onto a different Veeam backup and replication machine if needed. This backup is made automatically. There is a separate job for it. We will cover it later, but it is really important to store those offsite, not on the same machine. I mean, not on the management machine. You have a backup, then we recommend to store it offsite to ensure that it is protected from the, well, same incidents that may affect your primary Veeam backup and replication machine. Let's go to the next chapter. So the components breakdown, and let's look at the basic architecture of Veeam backup and replication. That again consists of various components, each component performing specific tasks. So again, you can have a lot of different components, but those three are mandatory, and those are installed by default. And those are the central management backup server, backup proxy, and the repository. And again, those components can be installed on a single machine, virtual or physical. However, a distributed installation definitely has its advantages, and namely the scalability, the traffic localization, the high availability, and others. So, like the scalability, that's the simplest one. I mean, um, as production infrastructure grows, so I simply deploy and deploy more and more virtual machines. So the volume of data getting bigger and bigger, and just my backup window grows, so I can install additional backup proxy to process the data. Or if I need to increase the capacity of the backup repository, I can configure the so-called scale out backup repository and add new extents as needed. And we will cover those in a detail later on, but just keep that in mind that, well, the distributed installation is still recommended. And high availability for some components, you can ensure high availability. In example, if I have deployed several backup proxies and one of them is powered off, the others will continue to work and the backup will not stop. So we will restart the backup job or recovery job. So because the backup proxies are involved in the backup and recovery as well. So what are those? What are those components? So the backup server, the management server, that is a Windows-based machine where Veeam Backup and Replication installed. And well, it stands at the heart of the backup infrastructure. It acts like the configuration and the control central. It is the control plane of everything related to backup infrastructure. So it orchestrates all the activities like the backup, the replication, the recovery, so all the backup policies, all the backup jobs. It manages the job schedulers and the distribution of resources because, well, if I have several proxies, what proxy will be used for that particular job? So that's what backup server is about. It got some scheduling components inside. Uh, and we have some additional configuration options in the backup server, like you can set up some global settings like network encryption between the Veeam components. You can set up throttling for traffic, etc. The backup proxy is responsible for moving the data, and it sits between the management machine and the production environment and handles the job processing. So that's the data mover. And again, we will cover that later. And the backup repository is just it's the place where Veeam stores all the backups, metadata for replicated virtual machines, copies of virtual machines. But to keep it simple, the repository, that is just a place where Veeam stores the backups. Let's take a look at how the proxy component operates within Veeam. And we have a couple of backup proxy, and it might seem a little bit overwhelming at first, but well, in reality, just we have different software components performing different tasks. So like if you have VMware environment, you just need a VMware backup proxy to back up your virtual machines. If you have Hyper-V environment, you have the backup proxy for Hyper-V, and etc. So I mean, the proxy that all proxies are unified by common tasks that they perform, regardless of the platform they are designed for. So for VMware, for Nutanix, for RHV, for Proxmox, etc. So, and the key task of a backup proxy include the reading of data from production environment, performing some advanced techniques like deduplication, compression, encryption, and sending the data to a backup repository during backup or to another proxy if we speak about replication. Let's break down the backup process in simple terms and take a look at the role of the backup proxy in this process. So as you can see, the data is transferred from the original location or source location to the target location. We call them transport agents. And actually, when the backup runs, you can see in the task manager that we run the so-called Veeam agent executable. So that's the transport agent. But sometimes we call them data mover. So that's the same. That's the same. So we have the data mover on the proxy, we have the data mover on the repository when we speak about the backup process. So when a backup job is running, the following happens. The data mover that sits on the proxy reads the data from the production store, from the production data store, performs again compression, deduplication, encryption, and sends the data to the target data mover. And the target data mover works directly on the repository if we speak about Windows or Linux repository, or on the so-called gateway server if we use a file share as a repository. And this data mover on the backup repository also performs some, let's call it final deduplication on each side and saves the data into a backup file. And we will cover those in some details, what are Veeam backups, files, the VBK, VIBs, etc. So it is important to notice that two components are always involved in the data transfer. It's like a client server architecture. So even if they are actually located on the same machine, because, well, I can combine the proxy and the repository, but still I will have two data movers, two components that will interact with one each other, that will transfer the data one to another through memory, etc. But it's a client server, so it's always the source data mover and the target one. Backup proxy, VMware backup proxy. Mm, so a VMware backup proxy is used for backup, for replication, for quick migration when we perform instant recovery and other features. We will cover the instant recovery later. And VMware backup proxy can use one of the following data transport modes. And by the way, the transport mode, that is just a method that is used by the Veeam data mover to connect to the production environment, to read the data and write the data to the target. And that is not that Veeam invented. I mean, there is a vSphere API for data protection. There is a reference guide for that one. It is a set of APIs we're using. If you open it, you will see that, hey, there are three transport modes that Veeam can use to interact with VMware. And those are called direct storage access, virtual appliance, or hot add, and network mode. And so we're using those. We're using the certified APIs to connect to VMware. So, and let's cover those because that's important. As a quick introduction, I'd like to remind you that when we talk about backing up virtual environments, we're referring to so-called image level backups. So, and the foundation of agentless image level backup is a snapshot. Because, well, and the snapshot enables us to achieve two key objectives. The first one, the consistency of the structure of the virtual machine. And the second one, the protection of the disks themselves during the backup. So it's also important to understand the process because the load from the backup doesn't end after them just copy the data, but after the deletion, after the commit of the snapshot. And really the snapshot consolidation can be, or deletion can be, let's say, a heavy procedure in terms of the load on the storage system. And it directly depends on the performance of the storage. And again, this is applicable to any image level backup and to any transport mode. Just keep it in mind. If you can't create snapshots, you can't create backups. Easy. So let's discuss the direct storage access mode. So in that mode, Veeam reads and writes data directly from the production storage using vSphere API for data protection over the storage area network, such as Fiber Channel, iSCSI, Fiber Channel over Ethernet. If you're using it, I don't know, not sure at all because, well, okay, I'll skip that. This storage access, that mode, bypasses the ESXi host and local area network and provides, well, fast data transfer speeds without affecting the production network. And then we use some, well, the metadata about the actual layout of the virtual machine disk on the storage array to perform the backup. So that is quite fast method and you can use it. So let's see how it works. Step number one, the backup proxy sends a request to a ESXi host to locate the virtual machine, to locate the ID of the virtual machine, and just to know, hey, where's the virtual machine? And the host locates the virtual machine on the storage system. Then we trigger vSphere to create a snapshot. We do not create snapshot. Well, that's just for information. We just give a command to vSphere. Hey, please create a snapshot for that virtual machine. Here is the ID of the virtual machine. We need the snapshot to be created. And then, I mean, if you get some issues while creating the snapshot, we need to investigate in the vSphere environment or in the Hyper-V environment. Step number 4, the ESXi host retrieves the metadata about the actual physical addresses of data blocks. So, hey, that virtual machine is on those blocks on the storage array. Okay, thank you. And sends that data to the proxy. Well, that's if this is some tiny configuration file. This is just some XML file that we receive from the ESXi host. And then step number 6, the backup proxy uses that metadata to copy the virtual machine data directly from the storage system over the storage area network. That's it. And we send the data to the repository. Done. And finalizing the backup, yeah, we do some cleanup procedures like we delete the snapshot, definitely. So some tips. In the direct storage access mode, the proxy must be a physical one if we're using Fiber Channel. The proxy must be zoned with the storage, and the volumes or the LUNs containing the virtual machines have to be mapped with the proxy, because if we can't access the data, we can't read it. And the last tip is that the data restoration, because we can use the same transport mode, don't forget, for backups and for recovery. But when we speak about recovery, we can recover just the thick drives for the direct storage access. Keep that in mind. So if you try to recover virtual machine disks in thin mode, they will be forced to recover in thick format, just for that mode, just for direct storage access. Next one, virtual appliance. That's a good one. In virtual appliance mode, we use the so-called VMware SCSI hot add feature that allows attaching drives to a virtual machine while the virtual machine is running. I mean, I can take a drive from virtual machine A and connect the drive to virtual machine B while the virtual machines are running. And that's exactly what we are using for virtual appliance mode. So, and during backup or replication or recovery, the disks of the processed virtual machines are attached to the backup proxy. And the process is as follows. So again, some administrative tasks like we send a request to ESXi to locate the necessary virtual machine. Hey, where's that virtual machine? Okay, I have located it. And then we trigger again a vSphere to create a snapshot. And then step number 4, the disks are attached to the backup proxy. Just attached, easy. And then the proxy reads the data directly from those disks attached to the backup proxy and sends those to the repository. And then we perform definitely some housekeeping uh, rules. We perform some cleanup process. We delete the snapshot, and the backup is considered to be finalized. The virtual appliance is the recommended mode when deploying a backup proxy as a virtual machine. And so it's easy to scale. So you can deploy Windows or Linux proxy very fast from templates. So you can scale out your proxies rapidly. Um, some pros, some cons of that mode. So, well, usually the virtual appliance mode is faster than the network block device mode we will cover next, especially in the case of a full backup or large incremental backups. And well, it may only be slower than the direct storage access in terms of speed. And the cons, again, that's solely from my experience. So the operation of mounting the disk, so that hot add procedure to the proxy, it can take up some time. Well, a couple of minutes, but just keep that in mind, because with really small amount of data, with incremental backups of really small data portions, sometimes NBD may prove to be faster. But again, really, it depends. And let's the last one, the network mode. So it is easy to set up. That one supports all types of storage and can be used with any infrastructure configuration. So as an example, if I have a standalone ASXi host with local drives that I'm using for my data stores in some remote office, some location, I can use NBD, or I can deploy a virtual machine. But well, it depends. I can have a standalone physical machine, a standalone backup machine, and if the first one and the second one are physical, the only transport mode I could use is the NBD. And in this mode, the data is retrieved through ASXi management interface. And we use for that the so-called network block device protocol. So it is quick to initialize the actual data transfer, and that can be rather fast with 10 GB links, uplinks, and faster. And the process, again, includes the following steps. So number one, we send the request to the ESXi host to locate the virtual machine. We locate it. Number three, we create a snapshot. And then we copy the data from production storage and send to the backup proxy over the kernel interface, ESXi management uplink. And then step number five, we create the actual backup file, and we consolidate, we delete the snapshot. So, well, from my practical experience, the management interface of ESXi are not on the fastest uplinks, and they are usually use 1 GB. So typically it is slower than hot especially for large volumes of data and a small number of parallel tasks. So again, you can try to use it, but our recommendation to use virtual appliance or direct mode. And but keep in mind that Veeam process multiple virtual machines in parallel. And if you have drives on different storage types, and if we can use different transport modes for different drives, we will use them. So, I mean, we can use direct access for one drive, and we can use network mode for another drive. So that's it for the transport modes. If you have any questions about VMware transport modes, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section. And let's move to our next chapter, that is the backup proxy for Hyper-V. And for Hyper-V, we have two transport modes, and they called on host and off host. So the first one, on host. Well, it's in the naming. I mean, during the on host backup, all processing, all everything is performed directly on the Hyper-V host, on the production host where the virtual machine that we're backing up is located. So the production host acts as a backup proxy. Well, that is fine. I mean, that is fine, but just uh, monitor, just look at the CPU, memory, and network consumption of your production host, because if they are not loaded above, let's say 80-90% in terms of memory and CPU, then there will be no issues, because usually the transport service, the data mover, adds from 5 to maybe 15% to CPU and memory load. And depending on the version of Hyper-V, the backup process can differ, and well, it will differ depending on the version of Hyper-V. So let's cover just the Hyper-V 2016, and later for 2016 and later we use the so-called production checkpoints, which ensure application consistent backups. And the backup process is as follows. So we ask the Hyper-V node for create a backup, for create a snapshot, and the Hyper-V brings the data in the guest virtual machine to a consistent state. We create a production checkpoint or the volume snapshot, depending on the version. And then we read the data from virtual machine. So we use the data mover for it. You remember, that is like a proxy. That is a process we launch in that case on the Hyper-V node. So it reads the data and sends the data to the backup repository. Boom, the repository, the backup is done. And number 4, definitely we perform some cleanup operations. So we consolidate, we delete the snapshot afterwards. So it is very simple. I mean, the on host. And by the way, when you add the standalone Hyper-V node or a cluster, doesn't matter for us, we deploy a transport service on the Hyper-V node when you add it to the inventory of Veeam Backup and Replication UI. The second mode, off host. So there are a few more steps before the job is completed. It is a little bit more complicated, but in that mode, the actual processing is transferred from the production Hyper-V host to a dedicated physical machine, the backup proxy. And the data mover is launched on that machine, on that backup proxy, which reads, which extracts the data, the virtual machine data from the production storage, process the data, and transfers the data to the repository. And so this type of backup does not create any load on the production Hyper-V node. But it's a tricky one a little bit. So in this mode, we use the so-called transportable shadow copies. And that is a Microsoft technology that allows you to create a volume snapshot where the virtual machine disks are located and mount this volume snapshot to another server, to another machine. And really, that process, that mounting, is fast, and it does not depend on the amount of data, and because it is performed on the storage level. So it does not affect the CPU load, network performance, etc. But there are some requirements for that mode to work, and I will cover those later. So let's see how that process works. So again, step number 1, we query the information about the virtual machines. We request the creation of a production checkpoint and the volume snapshot where the drives of the virtual machines are located. And then we mount the volume snapshot to the backup proxy, and the data mover that is running on the backup proxy reads the data from the mounted volume snapshot and just copies that data to the backup repository. and then we definitely unmount that snapshot and delete it from the volume, from the storage array, And but to be able to perform the off-host backup, you must meet a couple of requirements. So first of all, you need to have a backup proxy. I mean, a physical backup proxy machine. It is a physical machine. Yeah, you for let's say for um, evaluation purposes, for test purposes, you can assign the off-host backup proxy role to a virtual machine, but in production environment and to be supported, it has to be a physical one. It is critical to deploy the off-host backup proxy outside of the Hyper-V cluster. Otherwise, we have some signature conflicts in the storage area network with if you're using the CSV data stores. Second requirement, the versions. The versions of a Hyper-V host and off-host backup must match. And the last one, the important one, to create, to manage, to delete the volume shadow copies, the transportable volume shadow copies that are on the shared storage, you must install and configure the so-called volume shadow copy source hardware provider that supports transportable shadow copies. But so what you need to check if you have Hyper-V, if you want to try this mode out, you need to check if your storage supports VSS transportable shadow copies. If not, we can't do anything. If the answer is yes, then we can try to configure that one. So honestly, I've tried to give you as much detail as possible, but if you still have any question, again, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section, because especially with a Hyper-V, it might be a little bit complicated, especially the off-host part. And now let's really briefly discuss the HV and Red Hat proxies. So because, well, they are really similar, so I think I will cover the Nutanix in a detail, and then we can fast proceed with a Red Hat. So the architecture of Veeam Backup for Nutanix includes, well, the production cluster that is managed by how they call them, the CVMs, the controller virtual machines, if I'm not mistaken. So we got the production cluster, we have the Veeam Backup server with a Nutanix plugin, we have the backup appliance, we have a backup repository, and we have a worker virtual machine. So um, to back up the virtual machines from Nutanix, we use the native features like creating snapshots for agentless image level backup. So step number one, we send the backup job settings to the Nutanix HV backup appliance, and the backup appliance initiates the job. It uses the REST API to snapshot the virtual machine or protection domain in the job, and then we launch a worker. So a worker is like a proxy, but it is deployed and it is launched, powered on automatically when needed, and it is powered off when there are no backup job or recovery jobs running. So we launch a worker, we mount the virtual machine disks through iSCSI to the worker. So if you remember the VMware transport modes, it is similar to hot add mode, and so the worker reads the data, performs compression, and sends the data to the repository. And for that to work, you need to install the so-called plugin. So you need to install Nutanix plugin on the Veeam backup and replication machine, because the plugin facilitates the integration between the backup server and the Nutanix cluster. And the Red Hat and the Overt, they operate the same. So the architecture is very similar to Nutanix, and the components, they are essentially the same. So we have the Windows-based backup server that coordinates the backup process. we have a backup appliance that is a Linux-based virtual machine residing within the cluster. We have the plugin, we have the repository, and we have a worker. So again, a worker is an auxiliary Linux-based virtual machine that processes the backups. And the process is as follows. So we give a command for backing up the virtual machine. We create a snapshot. We connect the virtual machine disks to the worker appliance, and we transfer the data to the repository and delete the snapshot. And you can, by the way, you can manage all of those from the single UI. So, I mean, if you plan to migrate, as an example, from one hypervisor to another, you can just do it using Veeam, and you can manage all the environments using the same UI. That is not any problem at all. Now let's explore how we can add a backup proxy using VMware as an example. And just I'd like to remind you that you can have as many proxies as you need. You can have as many repositories as you need. So they are not subject to any licensing restriction as any other Veeam components. So we are licensed only by the production components, just the number of virtual machines or the sockets, etc. Well, to add a backup proxy, you open the Veeam Backup and Replication UI. You switch to the backup infrastructure section, and the backup infrastructure section is a place where you manage all the backup components. It's all about backup components. So you can create proxies here, you can create backup repositories here, you can add wide area network accelerators, some service providers, create some backend infrastructure for sure backup, etc. We're going to cover those. And by the way, you can use appliances here for Nutanix, for Azure, for Amazon. So again, if you have a hybrid deployment, everything is managed from the single UI. Then you right click on the backup proxy node, or you can choose add VMware backup proxy in the ribbon, and the wizard will open. So yeah, I want to add a VMware backup proxy. Thank you. Step number one, you select a machine, a server, to act as the backup proxy. So if you want to add a new machine, so I mean by default, and you can see that we are using the default installation. We use the same machine we have installed Veeam Backup and Replication onto. But if you want to add new proxy, then you just click Add New and add a new machine to the Veeam infrastructure. That can be Windows, Linux, physical, virtual, depending on your architecture. So as an example, again, let's rewind a little bit. If you have an external storage system and you want to create backups using Fiber Channel Fabric as an example, you deploy a physical machine with fiber channel NICs, with fiber channel initiators. You connect it to the fabric, you create zones, zone A, zone B, you create the zone using the command line interface in the Brocade environment. You unmask the LUNs on the storage so that the proxy can have access to the LUNs. And then you go to the Veeam Backup and Replication UI and add that new physical machine to act as a proxy. Then you can select the transport mode. So again, automatic or direct virtual network, depending on the configuration. So honestly, you can just keep it to automatic, and then Veeam will choose them as follows. So we will try to use the direct storage access, then virtual appliance, and finally network mode. So and don't forget that the backup job use the chosen transport modes, while for recovering, Veeam automatically selects the transport mode. So that is one for backups. Connected data source. So you can just select the scope. I mean, you can define the specific data stores with a connection to the backup proxy. Um, well, Veeam auto detects the accessible data store. So we rescan the VMware environment every 15 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. But if needed, you can limit the scope. So, and sometimes that can be useful in situations where we have some really distributed environments and you don't want Veeam to, I don't know, that proxy to rescan some storage that sits on the second side, as an example. In the maximum concurrent tasks field, set how many simultaneous tasks the backup proxy should manage. And it will queue the new tasks if the limit is reached, only starting the new one when another completes. And Veeam generates one task for each virtual machine drive, for each virtual machine disk. And the current recommendation is to allocate one core for every two tasks, which means like a four core CPU can handle up to 8 drives, while an uh, 8 CPU, 8 core can manage 16. But we will automatically set those depending on the configuration of the proxy. So when you add a proxy, we will get the information from the operating system. Hey, how much CPU you have, how much RAM you have, and depending on the number of cores, we will set that configuration, that concurrent tasks for you. So usually just keep it by default. Again, um, if you got any questions about the proxy, about VMware proxy, Hyper-V proxy, feel free to post them in the Q&A section. We will be more than happy to answer them. Now let's switch to the backup repository. And the repository is the location of your backup data. So when configuring a repository, there are a lot of options. That can be a Windows machine, Linux machine, that can be Veeam hardened repository, SMB, NFS. And we also support a variety of storage appliances like Data Domain, Store1s, Object First, Quantum, InfiniGuard, etc. And as you can see, we can use object storage as well. So you can go directly, you can send your backups directly to object storage if you have enough bandwidth. If you want to utilize that one, why not? You can go straight to any S3 compatible. You can go to Wasabi, you can go to Amazon, Google, Azure, and Veeam Data Cloud as well. We have a service. I mean, we have a backup as a service and we have a repository as a service. So a little bit about Veeam files. So each backup job creates a new file at the repository, forming a backup chain, usually consisting of full and incremental backups. So the first backup session copies all the data of a virtual machine or a physical one to a VBK file. So the VBK stands for full backup. Subsequent sessions copy, well, usually, I mean, if you want, you can create a full backup every day, but usually the subsequent backup session copies just the changes or the modified data to a VIB file. And the VIB stands for incremental backup file. So, and here is a list of some of the files that we use in the backup process. So I will not cover those in detail. So the most important are VBK for full, VIB for incremental. We got the uh, VLB for transaction logs. We have VLB for Oracle, for Linux. We have other structure for object storage, definitely, because there is no file system in object storage. There is namespace, etc. But let's keep those. Um, let's cover Windows backup repository as an example. So you remember the architecture, the client server architecture. We rely on two data movers for transferring the data from proxy to repository. So the first one is deployed on a backup proxy, and the second directly on a Windows repository or Linux repository, by the way. And these data movers, they are automatically installed when you add a server as a managed server in Veeam Backup and Replication UI. So, I mean, you do not have to deploy those manually before each backup session. No, we deploy a service to the proxy, to repository, and those servers or daemons automatically run data movers for each backup session. But remember, again, let's imagine an all-in-one installation. So I mean, I have a physical machine, and I can combine those. I can combine the proxy and the repository. So why not? I can use the local storage on the physical machine to use the repository. And so I will still have two data movers sitting on top of the very same machine. And by the way, by default, Veeam uses, when you perform the installation, we check the operating system and we take the largest local drive as the default repository. And well, for some installation, that is perfectly fine, but well, it is simple to manage and you have good performance. So because I have all my roles run on the same machine, they use memory to interact with each other. They use memory to send data from data mover one to data mover two. But hey, that's a single point of failure. If something goes wrong, I will lose the management machine, the proxy, and the repository. I can reinstall the management machine and recover the database. I can install a new proxy because proxy just processes the data. It doesn't hold the data. It's unpersistent. But the repository. So our recommendation is at least to separate the repository from the management machine. And that applies both to Windows, to Linux, etc. So, well, I mean, um, it is currently not possible to install the management server on Linux. So if you plan to use Linux as a repository, it will definitely require a separate machine. So, yep. So if you have a favorite Linux distro and you want to use it as a repository, it's also a perfect option. And the data mover architecture is the same, like you see on the screen. If you're using repository based on file share, SMB or NFS, then the so-called data mover starts on a special machine that is called a gateway. Don't get afraid, that's just another software role that is deployed automatically when you uh, add NFS or SMB file share as a repository. And the gateway will receive the incoming data stream from the data mover on the proxy and send the blocks to the file share. And the recommendation is to um, place the gateway as close as possible to the file share, And in practice, any Windows or Linux server included in the Veeam backup infrastructure can be used as a gateway. And speaking about sizing, the sizing for the gateway should be performed the same way as for the repository. And the object storage. So the latest category of repositories supported by Veeam is object storage again, which can be different options: S3, Azure Blob, Wasabi, and many other S3 compatible. I mean, you can install any S3 compatible storage on premises, by the way, if required. And we have a Veeam Ready program, so we're gonna put a link to the chat. Mm, we have a huge, diverse list of S3 compatible storage that you can work with. We have a couple of on-premises, we have public cloud, so and they possess different options. Like some of them have immutability, some none. So well, it depends. You can use those. Um, so to communicate with object storage, we use backup proxy, and actually there are two methods through which a backup proxy can connect to the object storage: directly, well, if I have an internet connection or firewall open to the object storage, or through a gateway. So, but just we can use a gateway if that option can be useful in environments with network address translation or firewall configurations, or just in case where direct access is restricted. So anyway, you can use object storage. You can use it together with the scale-out backup repo that we're going to cover later, or you can just use object storage and directly backup data to the object storage. Let's explore how to add a Veeam-based repository to Veeam Backup and Replication UI. So we are in the backup infrastructure section because that's the place where we manage the Veeam infrastructure. We right-click on the backup repository node and select Add Repository. And in the wizard, we choose direct attached storage. So if you want to add a Windows-based or Linux-based repository, you go for the option number 1, direct attached storage. If you want to add SMB or NFS share, you go for network attached. If you plan to use dedupe appliances, you go for the option number 3. And if you plan to use object storage or Veeam Data Cloud, you go for the object storage option. You choose Windows and hit next. So we skip the name step, but well, in the first step, in the name step, you just give it you just give it a name and some meaningful description, and then again you select, in that case, a Windows machine from the list you want to use as a repository, or you hit Add New and you add a new machine. That is how we scale our installation. You can hit the Populate button to view the disks. So you hit the populate, you see the new drive. And again, it is not required for that drive to be local. I mean, the operating system might think that, okay, I got a new local drive, but actually that drive sits on some external storage array, and I have connected through a storage area network. I mean, you can present some LAN, some volume from external storage system to a Windows machine or to a Linux machine, and the operating system thinks that, okay, I have a local SCSI bus and I have a local drive on it. So, and again, we can use it as a repository. So you hit populate, we rescan the drives, you choose the drive. Next step, location. Yep, definitely you can create, you don't want to store your backups just in the root directory, so create some Veeam backup folder, Veeam folder, etc. And you get some options for load control, so you can limit the concurrent tasks and data rates to control the load on the repository and to limit the data transfer speed to that repository, again, if required. And we have a couple of advanced options, but well, typically Veeam automatically configures the advanced settings for you. So I mean, but I want to explain those just for you so you can verify them, just to double check. So the first one, align backup file data blocks. Um, that one aligns the repository, aligns the data, the backup data stream with 4 KB boundaries for fixed block storage. And we use this feature, just for your information, we use that feature for ReFS, for XFS file system, for block cloning to work. So that's a good one. Keep that flag ticked. Well, it's recommended. The second one, decompress backup file data blocks before storing. Hey, why I want to decompress the data if I want to use compression? Well, if you're using storage appliance that has its own deduplication and compression algorithms, then we recommend to enable that option, which ensures the data is decompressed before being saved to the target device, because it doesn't make sense to compress the data twice. Number 3, this repository is backed by rotated drives. So, well, if you're using the rotated drives for your backups, just select that flag. And the last one that is definitely recommended, um, to create a separate backup file for every machine in the job. Use per machine backup file. That is recommended. That is the default. It is recommended. It speeds up the backup process, so better to have this flag ticked. Mount at the mount server step, again, that is the mount server is another role that is used for instant recovery, instant disk recovery, for and for file level and application item recovery. So when you launch, if you when you plan to, when you're recovering data like files, or items from databases, from guest operating systems, we are not recovering the whole virtual machine or drive, but we mount the drive from the backup server. That's it. So, and again, you can choose any machine from your backup environment to hold that role, the role of the mount server. And enable vPower NFS. Well, keep the NFS service enabled if you plan to use such features as instant recovery for virtual machines and physical machines, instant disk recovery, sure backup, or stage recovery features. Now let's dive into scale out backup repository, SOBR. And again, if you got any questions, please post them in the chat. No, don't put them in the chat. Put them in the Q&A section, please. Uh, a scale out backup repository. It is flexible. It is horizontally scalable repository because that one, let's say, aggregates multiple repositories into a single capacity pool. And the SOBR can grow by adding new extents if space runs low without requiring any data migration. So I can just add new repository to the SOBR and scale out. And for that, you can use any Veeam supported repositories in the SOBR, and it will maintain some unique features of each repository, of each extent. So for instance, if an extent supports immutability, then it will also function within the scale out backup repository. Or if we're using some kind of a dedupe appliance, all of its deduplication features will be fully operational after added to the scale out backup repository. And the interesting feature of scale out backup repo is that you can add multiple tiers to the configuration and configure policies to copy or to move the backups from performance tier to another. And we can currently, you can create 3 tiers. So the first one, the performance tier, that is, well, usually the performance tier, that is a on-premises repository for quick data access using, well, more traditional repositories like Windows machines, Linux machines, Dedupe appliance, SMB shares, NFS shares, but it also can be an object storage if you want. The second tier, the capacity tier, that is an object storage. So we consider that one for less frequently accessed data. So often using cloud or maybe on-premises object storage. And the last one, the archive tier. So that's for long-term retention or infrequently accessed data. And we support the Amazon Glacier for that one, or Azure Archive Storage. So as archive extends. And the data offloading to the capacity tier is enabled by policy, and the restoration, the immediate restoration is available from performance and from capacity tier. But for the archive tier, to recover the data, it requires some, let's say, preparation. You need to launch a process. You need to to tell them, hey, I want to recover data, some GFS, some yearly backup from archive tier, and we will retrieve the data from the archive tier. So it will take some time before you can perform the actual recovery. Well, that's an archive. How we can add the scale out backup repository. So again, you go to the backup infrastructure. We have a special node scale out backup repository. Hit add, give it a name, a description, hit next. And the next step is the performance tier. So at the performance tier step, you select the desired repositories to be used as performance extents. You add them by clicking add. And for some additional settings, you can click advanced and we get two of them. Again, use permission backup files. That is recommended. So we will create individual backup chain per machine, enhancing the utilization, especially with appliances that handle multiple data streams. And you can tick the second flag, perform full backup when the required extent is offline. So Veeam will create a full backup if an extent goes down or unavailable, ensuring that the new incremental backup can be added, because we need the full backup to be present so we can create an incremental one. And by the way, if you are adding a repository already used by another job, so let's imagine I have a backup policy that uses just a Windows repository, a physical Windows repository as a target. And if I add that Windows repository to the SOBR, the job properties will be updated. So I don't need to change the backup configuration. So it will target the SOBR. The placement policy. We have two policies for file placement for performance extents. So the first one is data locality, and if you choose that one, and well, actually that is recommended. We try to keep the full and the incrementals together on one extent for one backup chain. So, and the backup chain, that's the full one, the first full, the full backup, and the dependent incremental. So we try to keep them together. The next chain, the next full backup, as an example, the next backup chain can go to another extent. And the performance tries to spread full and incremental files across different extents, which definitely require a good network connection. But honestly, for SOBR, it's always a bad idea to have a good network connection between the nodes, between the extents. Performance you can customize. So you can customize the extents and specify whether it should store full or incremental files on the selected extent. And you can enable strict placement policy, and that means that Veeam won't perform backups that breach the policy, potentially causing job failures. I mean, if I told Veeam to, hey, on the extent number 1, I want to store just the full backups, and we will be strict with that policy. And since Veeam supports the so-called fast cloning technology on ReFS and XFS, the data locality mode is the recommended settings for most deployments due to space savings and due to efficiency of synthetic operations, like creation of synthetic full backups. Next step, the capacity tier. So you can extend the SOBR with object storage. And to enable the capacity tier, you need to tick the flag, extend scale out backup repository capacity with object storage, and select the object storage from pre-added repositories, or you can click add to add a new one. Then you can decide when the data moves immediately after creation, that is a copy policy, or after a certain age, that is a move policy. And by the way, you can combine those two. So for aged data movement. So like 14 days in that example, I can define the operational restore window in days. So all backups that are older than, I will go back, all backups that are older than 14 days will be moved from my local extents, from my performance tier to capacity tier. And additionally, I can set a threshold to force the movement of backup data if the performance tier is nearing its capacity. That is also an option. And the encryption, so you can just tick the flag to set a password and to encrypt the data uploaded to object storage. You can choose the offload window, so you can instruct Veeam not to use, I don't know, working hours for the offload process, and you can enable the health checks to schedule periodic health checks for the data, to check the integrity, to check the CRC hash sum for the data that is offloaded to the capacity tier. Um, I hope it become clearer a little bit what a scale out backup repository is. And now let's take 10-minute break. So me let me just reshare my screen quickly. I will just share the online timer for, we get 10 minutes. We just have 10 minutes of break, and that's it. If you got any questions, again, please ask them in the Q&A section, and see you soon. Let me share my screen again. So we're going for that one. Yep. Okay. So am I on mute? No, no. We'll live. We'll live. Um, next chapter. Next chapter. Sure backup. Sure backup and virtual lab. Um, And here we will dive into our so-called sandbox environments, isolated environments, and explore the usage scenarios for those. So the idea is that no one can guarantee absolute data integrity. I mean, definitely we check the backup file when writing to disk with a CRC check, but random bit shifts are still possible, resulting in, well, the industry call them the industry call them invisible corruption or silent corruption. And actually, there are many factors that can affect how a backup is created. Like, well, the VSS may fail due to timeout or some software issues. Something might have gone wrong with the writers or providers when we perform application aware backup. In the past, the VSS writers would quite often hang, but well, from my practice now, everything is more or less stable, especially with a stack of enterprise applications like databases, SQL, Oracle, etc. But as we all know, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So, yep. Uh, and what else could be an issue? Um, the change block tracking mechanism. And again, from my practical experience, right now it is not an issue, but you remember VMware has broken the CBT mechanism a couple of times, if I remember correctly, in version 5 and 6, and all the backups made using the CBT were simply unrecoverable. So, and that's just a couple of reasons why you need a method to verify your backups and the data in the backup. And for that, we have a stack of technologies that allows you to automate the verification of backups, because we don't want you to make it manually to waste your time on recovering the data, to check the data, etc. Um, so to verify the application, we create an isolated environment or the virtual lab. And this is so physically, that is a network with no physical uplinks. So it can't connect. So, I mean, the virtual machines that are inside that isolation, they can't connect to the production environment. But we can access inside that isolated environment through a special auxiliary virtual machine, a gateway that Veeam will deploy automatically when you spin up the virtual lab. And inside this inside that gateway, some rules like routing, the firewall, and NAT rules are configured. Then optionally, you can configure the so-called application group, and um, the application group, it's optional. I mean, that is um, that is an environment for the virtual machine you want to test. So it is a group of virtual machines that create the environment necessary for the operation of our target virtual machine that we want to work with in the isolation. So, for example, that can be Active Directory, NTP, CA, and other like key infrastructure components, not just the virtual machine we want to test. And so that's why the application group is optional, because if I have a virtual machine that does not require any dependencies, I can just take a single virtual machine from the backup job and run it in the isolation. And all that remains for us to do is to launch the required virtual machines and optionally an application group in the selected sandbox. And that is exactly what the third component, the sure backup job, is responsible for. And by the way, I can have as many virtual labs as needed for different applications, for different scenarios, for testing, for their etc. So at least, so if I have the resources to spin up virtual machines, I can have as many virtual labs as needed. In the job, in the sure backup job, you can define a set of different tests for each virtual machine, such as heartbeat, ping, and we have a set of predefined roles for different services. So, like we have a predefined role for Oracle database, Microsoft SQL database, SharePoint, file server, web server, etc. And you just tick the boxes. Hey, I want Veeam to check that virtual machine with that test or couple of tests. You can also add the AV scan and the content scan, the so-called Yara scan, to the verification test, and then you schedule that job, because you don't want to spend your time on that manual testing. You want to run it once a week, once a month, depending on maybe some external requirements, or depending on your strategy. And in the end, after the sure backup job is finished, you will receive a detailed report on the verification. In the latest release, the latest, the greatest 12.1, we offer two recovery verification modes. The first one that is recommended because it is that's the bet because it performs all the verification possible, and that is called full recoverability testing. And for that, you need to create a virtual environment because that's a full-blown virtual machine testing of physical, by the way. You know that we can perform P2V conversion. So if you have a backup of a physical machine, you can convert it using Veeam into a virtual environment. Easy. So, and you can perform tests on those as well. And the second option, the backup verification and content scan only, that performs the backup integrity, checks the some data for malware detection, for content analysis, for some sensitive data, without the need for a virtual lab or application group. So those are different. And on-demand sandbox, just a quick one, just for information that you can spin up the virtual lab for any purpose. So not for verification only, but you can use it for testing, for troubleshooting, apply some updates, install some software, run some custom scripts, pen tests, etc. I mean, um, you have a lot of data in your backups. Why not to use that data? You can spin up the virtual environment, create that isolated network, and use your backups for some testing. So why not? And you can again spin those on demand. The changes within the sandbox environment, they are held in the snapshots. We create a snapshot when you launch a virtual machine in the isolation because the data is still in the repository and it is read only, and that data is deleted, that data is discarded upon stopping the lab environment. So keep that in mind. Again, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section, and let's move on to discuss immutability a little bit. Um, so immutability. So just a quick introduction. So if you're still positioning backups only as a protection tool against, let's say, hardware failures, broken drives, motherboards, controllers, etc., um, we have great news for you. The backup industry has long been operating like an insurance policy, to be honest with you, because our task is to ensure the safety and integrity and availability of data regardless of the threat model you're using. And well, if stories about broken servers, failed drives, collapsed RAID arrays, they become, classics. The threat of losing access to the data due to the external action of ransomware is not taken seriously by many of us and not considered important enough. So, and the cyber criminals are constantly progressing, let's call it that way, progressing and expanding the features of their malware, and they perfectly understand that it's not enough to simply encrypt your data, your files, and demand a ransom because you have backups and can quickly recover. So therefore, one of the primary tasks of the malware is to locate and delete, wipe out, encrypt your backups. And after that, uh, openly reveal its presence with a ransom demand. So, and of course the question of security is complex, it is multi-layered puzzle, but the simplest thing we can suggest to protect your backups is to have at least one immutable repository, because immutable repository, the data that sits in the immutable repository can't be deleted, altered, changed until a predefined period, well until I have a physical access to your repository. Definitely, if I can get access to physically to your repository, I can just take it away or delete it or connect through the remote management interface and wipe out your RAID controller configuration, etc. So keep that in mind. And Veeam currently supports really a variety of immutable storage solutions. The simplest and most flexible option is to use Veeam hardened repository on any hardware from various vendors like HP, Cisco, Dell, Lenovo, you name it. But also that can be an S3 compliant storage with object lock immutability. That can be dedupe appliances. That can be public cloud providers like Amazon and Azure. They also offer immutability with S3 buckets and Azure containers. Okay, those can be specialized cloud storage providers like Wasabi. They offer S3 compatible object storage with immutability as well. So really there is a wealth of different options to choose from. So please choose your provider and ensure that you have at least one immutable repository in place. Let's cover Veeam hardened repository in detail. So that is based on general purpose server and does not require any special hardware. So all you got to do is just install a physical machine, mm, choose distro that is on the compatibility list with the repository role. So some kind of install an operating system, Linux operating system. We recommend something that is compatible with block cloning technology based on XFS file system, well, such as Ubuntu. And then just use local drives in that machine, create a folder to be used as a repository. And after that, you go to Veeam Backup and Replication UI and add a new repository. You remember when we have added a Windows repository, there was an option for Veeam hardened repository. And when we add that one, you use the so-called single-use access credentials to install our services. And after that, after we have installed the role on that machine, the credentials are no longer used and they are not stored in the database for the sake of security. And the services that work on the Linux machine, they operate in an unprivileged mode. So it is secure and it is compliant. Then in the repository step, you need to configure the path and some settings. So the location, that is just the path for your backups. Um, you can enable the fast cloning on XFS volumes. So Veeam can reuse the data blocks on the file system for capacity savings. We have that for XFS and for ReFS file systems. You set up the immutability period and, sorry, like in days. Just let me quickly go back. Yeah, set the immutability period and yeah, but also you can configure the load control by limiting the concurrent uh, uh, sorry, I've been just asked about the recording. So the session is being recorded and we will send the recording alongside with the slides in a couple of days, just in a couple of days. Yep. So the immutability period, and you can set up the load control the same we have for any repository, like the limit the maximum concurrent tasks to and limit the read or write data rate. Um, and the same for the object storage. So we offer the data immutability to prevent deletion from object storage. And the immutability is supported on, again, Amazon, Azure, IBM, Wasabi, Veeam Data Cloud. And depending on the object storage provider, so as an example, for S3 storage, for S3 compatible, you need to activate the object lock and versioning during the backup creation. For Azure, you need to turn on version level and enable blob versioning while setting up the storage account. The next topic is storage integration. And Veeam Backup and Replication has um, three key points of integration with storage systems. For VMware environments, we can use the hardware snapshots for virtual machine backups, as well as orchestrate the creation of snapshots and enable recovery from those. So you can create snapshots on your storage arrays using Veeam Backup and Replication and recover virtual machines, files, and item level from those snaps. The NAS integration is about using the NAS snapshots when we perform unstructured data backup. And for Vim Agent, we can backup Windows servers using the storage array snapshot as well. So for VMware, backup from storage snapshots enhances the vSphere backups, not usually maybe speeding up the backup, but reducing the load on the production environment and the ESXi host. And the same works for the file share and for Vim Agent for Windows in managed mode. So we can use uh, storage snapshots to backup volumes from Windows Agent as well. So, and this method uses the backup proxy and hardware volume shadow copy service provider to minimize the impact on servers during the backup, while comparing to traditional software-based VSS backups. The idea, the concept of VMware backup using storage snapshot is that although we can't completely eliminate the VMware snapshot, the software snapshot, using it together with a hardware snapshot often accelerates the backup and reduces the load on the production environment. And this is achieved because the VMware snapshot exists for a shorter period of time and removed or deleted or consolidated much more rapidly. So the idea is that we create a VMware snapshot, and immediately after that, Veeam instructs the storage array to create a hardware snapshot of the volume on which the virtual machine is located, and then we command to delete the software snapshot, the VMware snapshot. And that usually happens quickly because we just created it. After that, we create a hardware snapshot and we ready to delete the software one. And then we use the hardware snapshot of the storage array to perform the backup. And after the backup is created, we can delete the hardware snap as well. So, but to use the integration, you must first add your storage system to the Veeam Backup and Replication UI. And for that, you use the storage infrastructure section. So the storage infrastructure section is only for production systems when you plan to use VMware integration. So you click add storage, um, and the wizard, yeah, add storage, and the wizard appears. So, and we support a lot of different storage systems, and those are divided into two categories. The first one, the built-in. So I mean, those are natively supported by Veeam. The integration is built into Veeam Backup and Replication. So you just go through the wizard. You go, hey, I want to add Hyperflex or Nimble or Storewise or NetApp, etc. Those are inbuilt. But there is also another category that is called um, universal storage integrated systems. And the idea is that some storage vendors develop this integration using the Veeam API, and that requires the installation of an additional plugin. So for you to use it, if your system is a universal storage integrated system, you have just a simple extra step. You need to go to veeam.com, download the plugin for your system, and install it on the machine where Veeam Backup and Replication is installed. And after that, the storage array will appear in the UI. So in my case, let's just examine the wizard using data on tap as an example. So, but all the wizards are, well, the same. I mean, you Step number one, you give it a name, you give it a description, enter a fully qualifying domain name or IP address, provide some helpful description, and you need to define the role. Why I want to use that system, and we have three options here. So option number one, that is for VMware backups, block or file. Maybe I'm using my NFS share for my data store. So that's option number one. Option number two, block storage for Windows machines. So if I want to use storage array and create uh, hardware snapshots in conjunction with Veeam agents, I choose the second option, and the last flag is for NAS backup. And additional steps in the wizard on the left pane, they will unlock upon the role selection, and you must select at least one role to continue. Um, Credential step, you just give us the admin credentials for the storage system and select the protocol. Well, actually, for certain arrays, admin account or root account is not required. Well, instead, you can configure the permissions, so you can be specific on the permissions you give to Veeam, and that's the best practice. You stick with the least amount of privileges in any software in any situation. And all that is described in the documentation. So in some, you need to give root credentials. In other, you may set up granularly. Um, Choose the credentials, select the protocol, the standard port, but you can update it if required. If you have chosen block or file storage for vSphere, you can proceed to the vSphere settings and you can pick up the protocol to use. So is it a fiber channel or iSCSI or NFS? You can decide whether Veeam should automatically create NFS export rules, volumes to scan, so you can limit the scope to specific volumes if you don't want Veeam to rescan all the volumes on the storage array. You can limit the scope for backup proxies, so you can choose or add proxies for rescans, and you can explicitly choose, hey, I want to use those proxies to work with that storage system and the mount server. So you can select an existing mount for file level and application item recovery, or add another one. If you have selected the NAS filer option, you can configure the NAS options as well. Again, the protocol, the volumes to rescan, and the proxy. So the options are the same. And after adding a storage to Veeam Backup and Replication, just confirm that the enable backup from storage snapshot is activated, which is usually on by default, but just double check if you plan to use that one, that flag is enabled. So and for that, you go to the job settings, you go to the storage step of the wizard, and go to the advanced step, and then to the integration tab. In the If the job includes multiple virtual machines on the same volume, you can limit the virtual machines per storage snapshot by setting a specific number, and these will group the virtual machines and create a separate snapshot for each group. And if a storage snapshot can't be created, well, for any reason, select the last failover to standard backup. And so to ensure that virtual machines still get backed up in the standard mode using just the viewer snapshot only, again, if something gets wrong with a hardware snapshot. And lastly, when we have another architecture, another configuration possible, when paired with a secondary array, you can use the secondary storage as source for backups to reduce the impact on the production one. So let's take as an example of the same NetApp arrays. Imagine that I have two data centers, each with a storage system setup, and between them I have an asynchronous replication that is called snap mirror. It is configured. And so I create a snapshot on primary storage system and send that snapshot to the secondary storage system. So with Veeam, you can use the replicated snapshot and use it as the source of your backup, completely eliminating the load on the primary array. And well, why not? If you have that configuration, you can use it. Um, Again, if you have any questions regarding to storage integration, please feel free to use the question section. And our next topic, we're gonna cover briefly, really briefly, the tapes. So it is a short chapter. Um, still, still tapes is quite a popular choice for storing the backups for long-term archiving and compliance, and well, often used for offsite backups to follow the 3-to-1 backup framework. And Veeam features integrated tape support and enabling the tape management and creating of tape backup policies directly from the UI. So Veeam supports the LTO and IBM tape libraries, which include physical libraries, standalone drives, and virtual tape libraries, as well as their logical partitions. So you can partition, you can divide logically your physical library into split them up. However, Veeam doesn't support sharing tape device with other Veeam backup servers or with third-party software, except again through uh, dedicated library partitions. And for tape connections, both the direct connection like fiber channel or serial attached SCSI and remote connections like iSCSI and switch fabrics are supported, and you can archive various types of data to tape, including the virtual machine backups, the Veeam agent backups, and structured data, or entire backup repository. I mean, as a source for your tape job, you can use the entire repository and send it to the tape. And to work with the tape library, we deploy a special software role, nothing new. I mean, it is not deployed by default, but if you need to use a tape, you need to deploy a software role that is called Veeam Tape Server. And this component is responsible for transferring data to the tape device. So you can assign that role to a Windows or Linux machine that is connected to tape device, and well, it performs like the functions of a proxy. So it manages the read-write operation, the movement of data, and the loading, unloading of tapes on the actual library. So the tape can be assigned to a to a dedicated server, to a physical server, or to a server with an existing role, for example, a repository, or even to a Veeam backup server itself. I mean, for instance, if we in the case of an all-in-one installation, I can have all the roles combined. So, and after setting up the tape server, connecting the tape device to it, installing the required drives for tape library, add the tape server to the Veeam Backup UI to function as the tape server and start creating backup to tape jobs. That's it. And don't forget to install the drivers of the tape library to the tape server, because we use those to communicate with the tape library. Um, let's quickly cover the component that sometimes is very useful, that is and might come in handy, that is called the wide area network accelerator. And it is, again, that is another Veeam role, and it's our own development. I mean, you can't use it for anything else uh, except Veeam. So it is not a general based WAN accelerator. You can use it, just it is fine tuned for the data transmitted by Veeam. And you can use it for backup copy jobs and for replication jobs. And well, um, in short, the accelerator can be described as a cache of previously transferred blocks that can be used to lower the load on the network. So if a previously transmitted block is sent again, Veeam identifies it and transmits only the hash of the data block across the network, so not the data itself. And the data at the target location is extracted, is copied from the cache on the target side. And that ultimately leads to the reduction of the network traffic. And additionally, it applies some additional algorithms and methods like variable length block data deduplication. We perform some TCP/IP optimization for connections with high latency. We apply automatic restart of interrupted connections, etc. So, and for the setup for the Van accelerator to work, you need two of them, one at each side. So one for the source and one for the target. So they work in pair, and it got two modes of operation. It has the high bandwidth mode and low bandwidth mode. So, and it's simple. We recommend using the high bandwidth mode for links for connections faster than 100 megabits per second. And if compared with the low bandwidth mode, it does not use the global cache, but it uses a faster compression method. It uses optimized processing of data and some, let's call it, alternative deduplication mechanism. Compare it to direct backups to, to launching your backup jobs without Van Accelerator. So if you get links from 100 megabits per second to 1 GB, you can use the Van Accelerator in high bandwidth mode. And usually, yeah, it really speeds up the things. But anyway, you can always test it. And before you use it, as with any other Veeam role, you need to add it. So you go to the backup infrastructure, you go to the Van Accelerator node, and again, you install it. You can install the accelerator to an existing proxy as an example. So again, you can combine different roles, or you can add a new virtual machine or a physical machine. You specify the port and the number of concurrent streams, and a separate option, again, high bandwidth. So again, if you get speed from 100 megabits to 1 GB, use that one. And from my practical experience, at speeds above 1 gigabit per second, a direct connection between proxies is likely to be faster. So I mean, if you replicate the data and you get the links faster than 1 GB, you better go like proxy to proxy. Or if you use backup copy jobs and if you get links like 10 GB, you can just go from repository to create a second copy of your backup. And finally, when configuring the Van Accelerator, allocate sufficient disk space for the global cache. So we do not have enough time, so we will not cover the sizing of this as well as other components, but uh, we will help you, and our engineers will be more than happy to assist you with it. Yeah, and you apply and we deploy the role. And in order to start using the Fun Accelerator, you simply need to choose the appropriate option in the backup copy job or in the replication job and specify the source and the target Van Accelerator. So remember, those can be used for backup copy jobs or for replication jobs. Because, well, why it can't be used for the primary backup job? Because, well, in our opinion, the first backup should be as close as possible to your production environment on the same data center for faster recovery and for faster backup. So you don't need a Van accelerator for the first backup. All right. Um, Enterprise Manager. That's a good one. The enterprise manager, it is a component for, well, it's manager, so it's for management, I guess. So it's for management, it is for reporting, and it allows for centralized control over multiple Veeam backup and replication machines from one web-based UI. And really, it is very useful in improving operational efficiency in large environments, especially if you have couple Veeam backup and replication machines. So with Enterprise Manager, you can control job operations, you can monitor activity, set up notifications across multiple backup servers, and it offers search capabilities within your backup data, ability to recover virtual machines, items, files, etc. And the centralized license management is also available. So, how to install it? The same ISO. I mean, Enterprise Manager is installed from the very same ISO as Veeam Backup and Replication. You just need to select Install Veeam Backup Enterprise Manager. And the Enterprise Manager, the installation process for it is similar of installing Veeam Backup and Replication. You read and accept the license agreement, you specify the license file, and during the system configuration check, we verify the presence of the necessary software components. If they are missing, we will attempt to install them automatically, and it requires typically that requires a reboot of the machine, so keep that in mind. At the ready to install step, you have the option to proceed with the default settings. Again, the same we got for Veeam Backup and Replication, so you can just click the install button, or you can customize it. So just click the customize settings, and well, customizing includes some additional steps, such as, again, selecting a database engine. So you can choose an instance to host the database and set the authentication mode. And remember, it's crucial that the database engine, the type, matches the one used by all the Veeam backup and replication machines connected to this enterprise manager, because we use kind of the database replication between the Veeam backup and replication databases and the enterprise manager, so they must match. From architecture standpoint, it's well, it's best to have a single enterprise manager per environment. Well, it does make sense to have a lot of them, ideally installed on the recovery side or witness side for immediate access during some recovery scenarios. So let's imagine we have a typical architecture with two Veeam backup and replication machines, each having their own configuration database, and an enterprise manager sits on top, connecting to both of the Veeam backup and replication machines and gathering data from both and providing centralized control and management. And a quite common scenario that I would like to discuss looks as follows. So um, imagine that I have, okay, two sites, each with an installed Veeam backup and replication and its own backup infrastructure and some production environment that needs backing up. And both sites belong to the same legal entity. So in my Veeam.com account, I have one license key. What should I do in this case? Because according to the licensing policy, I cannot use one license key for different Veeam backup and replication machines. But what I can do, I can create a licensing case. I go to veeamsupport.com, licensing case, and ask to split my key in the proportion that I need right here and right now, and apply the appropriate key for each Veeam backup and replication installation. Okay, but what if the number of virtual machines has changed? So on site one, I've just decommissioned a couple of virtual machines, but on site two, now we have more. So, well, option number one, I go, again, I create a licensing case. But what you should do, you should install Enterprise Manager, add one licensing key to it, and it will act as the central licensing server. And everything will work just fine as long as you do not start exceeding the total number of workloads in the whole infrastructure. So that's the idea. So that's web UI, and after logging to the enterprise manager, the home view appears, the dashboard, and you have access to different tabs for various management and recovery functions, which, by the way, are all based. So we have the jobs. That one allows for job management across all the backup machines. So I can edit the backup policy, I can run it, I can disable, I can clone the job. I have some tabs for recovering unstructured data. I have tab to recover my virtual machines. The files provides the ability to browse and restore the guest operating system files, and for application aware backup recovery, I can use the items tab. So if I need to recover mailboxes, SQL, Oracle, Postgre databases, I can use the enterprise manager as well. And you get some configuration options here, because, well, you need to configure it. First of all, what do you need to do? You need to add the backup server to the enterprise manager. So again, because we collect the data about the jobs, about the infrastructure from added servers. So you need to add each backup server one by one to the enterprise manager. So you hit add in the backup server section and give us the fully qualified domain name or the IP address of it. vCenter. Under the vCenter tab, you can see details for vCenter servers integrated into your setup. You can check the version, the operation status of vCenter, as well as deploy or uninstall the Veeam plugin for basic backup operations. And also, Enterprise Manager enables admins to allow VMware users to manage their virtual machine backups and restore them using the self-service portal. You need to enable it, and that's just a web-based tool linked with Enterprise Manager, and you can limit the scope. So we use the role-based security to control access, and you can delegate specific permissions for users to perform certain operations and to limit the scopes. So you can add a user account and assign role that define the permission. So like group, user group, and the roles available are that can be a portal admin, a user, or an operator. And for portal users and the restore operators, admins can limit their restore capabilities to specific objects like virtual machines, or so I can limit some specific virtual machines for DBAs or Exchange servers for Exchange admins, ensuring that my personnel can only access the relevant scopes and relevant resources and virtual machines for the recovery tasks. Um, Also, we offer an alternative method for data encryption. So, I mean, that enables you to decrypt the data in case where the Veeam backup and replication encryption password has been lost or forgotten. We will cover those. I mean, you can create a backup job and you can tick the flag, hey, I want that backup to be encrypted, and then you use a password for that. But what if the password has been forgotten? So in those situations where the password is lost, you can use the Enterprise Manager to decrypt these backups. Um, okay. And about the licensing, so I covered those, but so again, the Enterprise Manager monitors the licenses across connected backup servers and, well, ensures the consistency by synchronizing and updating the license consumption. So it really streamlines the license administration if you have several Veeam backup and replication machine deployed, And by clicking the report button, you can view which workloads are consuming the license. We can say, okay, those virtual machines are consuming the license, those hosts, etc. Um, Again, let's take a 10-minute break. Really, I don't remember if you have if we get two breaks or three breaks, but okay, let's take again a 10-minute break, and this is also a great opportunity to ask any questions as well as grab a cup of coffee or tea. And then we're gonna switch to the main menu of VM backup and replication and proceed with the creation of the backup job. So let me start the timer again and let me share the new screen with a timer. Here we go. 10 minutes. See you soon. All right, so we are back. Let me put, oops. I guess you can see the screen. So welcome back. And let's move on to, yep, thumbs up, thumbs up. Thank you. So the main menu of Veeam backup and replication, we have a lot of things to cover here. Um, to access the main menu, you need to click the special button in the top left corner, which is sometimes referred to as the hamburger menu. Let me, okay, I will skip that one. So yeah, it's sometimes referred to as the hamburger menu. And we have a lot of different options here. So let's start with the credentials and password settings. So, and well, you can use the credentials manager to create and maintain a list of credentials that you use to um, create and maintain of everything about the backup infrastructure. So, and we have the data center creds here. Those are used. So the first one, the data center creds, they are used to connect to vCenter, to ESXi host if you use standalone host, to Hyper-V clusters, to Hyper-V standalone nodes, cloud appliances like Amazon, Azure appliances, and all the accounts for application aware processing. And you can use standard account here, like with username and password, or the recommended GMSA accounts, the SSH creds for Linux, or SSH keys to access different Linux machines in your environment. Next one, cloud credentials. Those are for cloud storage and compute accounts. So you need those for backup to object storage or recovering to cloud instances, etc. So we have as an example. We have you can recover any backup, physical or virtual, created by Veeam into Azure. But before that, you need to specify the Azure compute and storage account. So we need, because we need some environment that we can use to recover too. So you need to use the cloud credentials for that. Encryption passwords. Those are used to protect the actual encryption key that we are using for encrypting the backup files. And the last one, the key management server option. So that is for integrating with external key management servers, and uh, you can use the external KMS, and so all the keys will be managed and rotated by an external server. The next settings in the main menu is that is one for users and roles. So um, to perform different operations, you can add, and it is recommended not to have like everyone as a root account, as an admin account. So you can limit the scope to the users by assigning different roles. So I can add a user or a group in the domain username format, and then from the role list, select the necessary role to be assigned. So we have the backup admin, we have the backup operator, the tape operator, or the restore operator, limiting the scope just for recovering the data as an example. The next settings, network traffic rules. So by default, Veeam is configured to use multi-threaded data transfer during each job session, and that this means that data from virtual machines from production is sent from the source to the target through separate TCP/IP connections. Um, However, scheduling multiple jobs to execute concurrently could potentially result in significant network load. So should the network capacity fail to sustain that load, you have the option to either deactivate the multi-threaded transfer, not recommended, or modify the count of TCP/IP connections. So if you see that your network is overloaded, you can play a little bit with that setting. Also, you can set up the settings for throttling and encryption of the backup traffic, and those rules apply only to the traffic sent between the backup infrastructure components. An example, from proxy to repository, or from first repository to the second repository, etc. And also you can choose networks. You can choose the preferred network. So you can choose the network over which Veeam must transport the data. And that really can be useful if you have a non-production network, a backup network, and want to route the data traffic over this network instead of the production one. The next setting is, let me check. Oh, those are exclusions. So that is global exclusion feature that enables you to exclude or omit virtual machines from processing. And by setting a global exclusion, you can just exclude virtual machine from all jobs with exception of backup copy and sure backup jobs. And additionally, virtual machines can be excluded from malware analysis, a topic we will dive into later. So the core idea is that you can choose to exclude, an example, a vCenter. For instance, I don't know, but I'm backing up my vCenter using the native tools as an example. I don't want Veeam to process my vCenter, so I can exclude it. Or I don't need to create a backups for some auxiliary virtual machines for uh, auxiliary Linux appliance I use in a virtual lab as an example. So I can exclude it and never create a backup of that one. So, essentially, any virtual machine that does not require protection or is already protected by other means can be excluded from the backups. And we got global exclusions for that. Next one, general settings of Veeam backup and replication, and we get a couple of them. Let's cover the main settings: the I/O control, the input/output control, and that one is to control the load on the production array. So you can enable the storage latency control. You just need to tick the enable storage latency control checkbox. And with this feature enabled, Veeam monitors the latency on the production data stores while performing the backup or replica or recovery using the real-time metrics from the hypervisor. And there are two predefined latency thresholds. So, and upon reaching the first one, Veeam stops assigning new tasks to the, let's call it, affected data store. And should the latency hit the second threshold, more critical one, the Veeam uh, data mover that interacts with that data store will reduce the speed of data retrieval or writing. So that mechanism is designed to back off once the latency returns to acceptable levels, to the thresholds, and the system that prevents assigning new tasks to the data store. So the first one checks the latency every minute, and the mechanism responsible for throttling of the existing tasks, the second one, does so every 20 seconds. The next one, the email settings. Well, nothing interesting here, but I mean, you can configure the as the global. Those are the global settings. You can configure the individual settings for a backup policy if required, but before that you need to configure the global settings. So SMTP server, and you can receive notifications on success, warnings, failures, and retries. And these reports will detail all the issues, errors, uh, what has been successfully backed up and what is not. And this allows us to stay informed about the backup process and quickly address any issues. So definitely that is a recommended one. You can set up automatic notifications for key events such as low disk space, support contract expiration, and the release on new product versions or updates. And the most critical alert is for low disk space. So Veeam checks the available space, and that is important on both the backup repository and the production storage before running a job. And if the space falls below a threshold, a warning is displayed in the job session details. And well, I guess the idea behind the repository notification is clear, and the notification for production data store, really they are equally important to prevent space depletion due to the snapshot creation during job execution, which can pause virtual machine and lead to issues. You remember, there is no backup if we can create a snapshot, and after we create a snapshot, that is a sparse drive, that is a separate disk for virtual machine that accepting the new writes. So it grows and grows and grows, and if we hit the limit, all the virtual machines would go to suspend. So we keep an eye on your production data store as well, because we're smart. um, the history setting, so that is just this, you can limit the scope of the history sessions that have been running in Vim backup and replication. Just that, do you want to show all sessions or limit those, and the session retention that affects the configuration database size, by the way. um, Additionally, directly from Vim backup and replication UI, you can launch the putty to connect to your Linux machines. We get Swagger to create to for REST API session if you want to test something, and a PowerShell console as well. Um, the configuration backup. Yep. So one of the most critical aspects of the main settings is the configuration backup, and we highly recommend to have this feature enabled, and it is enabled by default. Um, And that effectively creates the backup of a configuration database, so you can use it later in case you need to migrate the management machine or in case of a disaster. So for it is highly recommended to use not to use the default repository, but to use other repository far away from the management machine, or create the configuration backup on the local repository, but then create a copy of that configuration backup and send it to the object storage to offsite location so you can use it later. Schedule, definitely create a schedule for that backup, and you can enable the encryption. And the encrypting the configuration backup, again, it is a best practice, and doing so, it protects not just the Veeam configuration, but also secures the sensitive data, such as the passwords stored in the password manager and configuration related to cloud appliances if you use them. And if you need to migrate or recover your configuration, you install a brand new instance of Vim Backup and Replication. And well, you go through the wizard. Hey, I want to recover my VBR, or I want to migrate my VBR installation, and you uh, use the configuration backup for it. Um, Here we are. So we have reached one of the most extensive part of our training, the jobs. So questions are welcome. Finally, finally, um, well, Veeam is fundamentally built around the concept of jobs. And in Veeam Backup and Replication, you can configure uh, different tasks like backup jobs, replication jobs, continuous data protection policies, backup copies, sure backup, and more. And those can be executed on schedule or on a one-time basis, and they can be created and configured again through the UI or by using automation through the REST API or PowerShell scripts. Um, and as the backup resources are limited, and to have some priorities for critical jobs, we use a priority system for resource allocation. And to simplify the system that we use within Veeam Backup and Replication, tasks are just given the priority based on their type, but actually that is mm, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more complicated, and we have a comprehensive description of this method in the help center. But let's keep it simple. Just we give the priority based on the type. So by example, the restore jobs might be given the highest priority because that's about recovery of data, while less critical tasks like archive jobs, offload jobs receive the lowest priority. And by the way, when the high priority option is enabled for the job, it is marked with a red flag in the list of jobs, and you can use it. And let's dive into the details of the backup proxy, but well, not too much. So when a new backup job session starts, Veeam starts the so-called Veeam Backup Manager process on the backup server that is responsible for that backup job. And the backup manager reads the job settings from the configuration database and creates a list of virtual machines it needs to process. Next, backup manager connects to backup service that includes resource scheduling mechanism, and this scheduler checks what backup infrastructure components are available and assigns backup proxies to the task. Then we connect to the transport service on the repository and to the backup proxy. They connect with each other. They launch the data mover process, And they set up a number of rules for data transfer, like network traffic throttling if you enable, encryption if you enable, and so on. Next, we query the information about virtual machine, about hosts from the, if we speak about VMware, we use the broker service for that. If you enable the application aware image processing, then we connect to the guest operating system, deploy a runtime inside the guest operating system. So we perform some in-guest processing tasks to perform application consistent backup. And then we request for the vCenter or ESXi host to create a snapshot. And then the data mover that sits on the proxy read the data using one of the transport modes. You remember the virtual appliance, MBD, or direct send access. We read the data, perform compression, deduplication. We filter out the zero data blocks. We filter out by default the swap files, and we send the data to the repository. And after the backup proxy finishes reading the data, Veeam requests the vCenter to or ESXi host to delete the snapshot. So that's the process of the backup job. Let's create a sample backup job. So we go to the home section of Veeam Backup and Replication UI. You click create a new backup job. You give it a name. You give it a description, and you can set up the high priority flag if necessary. Step number 2: virtual machines. On the second step of the wizard, you just select the virtual machines you wish to add to the backup job. You hit the add in the upper right corner, and there are, well, classical VMware views. In this case, hosts and clusters. You can switch to virtual machine and templates, or data stores and tags, or a combination of tags. And below you can find the search bar for finding objects by name. So again, you can be very creative. You can select virtual machines one by one, or you can back up the whole vCenter. You can back up the whole data store, or you can use tags. And the logic behind creating a tag can be something like, the first tag is it's like SQL databases, and the second tag can be backup once a day. Then you assign this tag in the vCenter, or use Veeam Business View to assign those automatically. And then you use that tag in the backup policy. And all the virtual machines that you assign tag to will be automatically added to the backup policy. So no need for any job modification at all when you assign the new tag to a virtual machine. So it will be added automatically to the backup job or replication job. Veeam can exclude virtual machines, disks, or virtual machine templates from processing. So during a virtual machine backup, you can exclude certain disks. For example, I want to back up all disks except the system drive, as an example. Just I want to focus on only on disks with file shares, and this exclusion is set at the virtual machine stage. So you can click the exclusion button and select. That is important that you click exclusions, but then you select the disks that you wish to include in the backup. Don't ask me why, but that is by design. So just keep it in mind. You exclude, but then you include the disks in the backup. So, and the templates, you can exclude the templates if usually you don't need to back them up. The next step, storage. So first you can specify if you want to force the processing of this backup job by a particular proxy. And by default, all available proxies can process this job, which is the automatic selection. And the automatic selection balances the load among the backup proxy servers and chooses the least busy in the terms of active sessions. Next, you select the repository that will be used to store the backups for this job. And on the very same step, we configure the retention policy. And you can choose between retention based on the number of recovery points or specify the retention policy in days being the default one. And to retain certain full backups beyond the short-term retention policy for long-term archival, you can set up the GFS policy. So you can set up the weekly, monthly, and yearly full backups and keep them on the same repository. Um, let's look at the advanced settings of the backup job, and the first thing we're going to discuss is the backup mode. Let's skip the first one. We'll skip over the reverse incremental mode right away because it will no longer be available in future versions of Veeam. So if you're using that, keep in mind it will be deprecated soon. Well, next year or in a couple of years. So we'll see in a couple of years. The second mode that is called the forever forward incremental operates under the condition that you uncheck the option to create periodic full backups. So you have the incremental checked without regularly creating the full backups. And in this case, the backup chain will consist of the first full backup followed by a certain number of dependent incremental backups. So we have the first full backup and the incrementals all along. So that's why it's called forever forward incremental. And that mode, that chain, takes up less space and is processed quite quickly. But if you enable the creation of periodic full backups, either active or synthetic, we will post a link to the difference between the synthetic and the active full. The chain will become incremental. So our chain is the first full backup, then we have a series of incremental backups, and then another full backup on the day you choose, let's say on Saturday or Sunday, followed by a new series of backups. And retention, by the way, that is the deletion of old recovery points that are out of the retention policy is done automatically by Veeam according to the chosen retention depth. So again, you can choose the forever forward incremental with the first full backup and the chain of incrementals, or if you need to create periodical full backups, you can definitely do so. And well, we encourage you to do so. Next one, maintenance. A couple of options here. Um, Storage level corruption guard, it's about the health check of the latest recovery point to ensure its integrity. And uh, you can use the storage level corruption guard especially for jobs without scheduled active full backups to protect against potential corruption over time, or use scheduled sure backup jobs, definitely. Um, Remove deleted items data after, that is, that defines how long to retain backup data for deleted virtual machines. So after this period, in that case 3 days, Veeam will automatically remove the data for virtual machines that were deleted in the production or no longer part of the job, and by default it is unchecked. And the last one, the defragmentation. Um, this process, so to manage space efficiently, you can select this defragment and compact full backup file to, let's say, reorganize and reduce the full backup size. And that option, we recommend that option to be enabled for forever forward incremental. to avoid full backup file fragmentation. That's it. If you create periodical full backup, you don't need it. Next, storage. So by default, Veeam deduplicates backup data before storing it in the backup repository, which effectively reduces the backup file size. Well, at the expense of some potential performance reduction, but honestly, keep it enabled. Next one, exclude swap file blocks. We check the MFT on Windows machines to exclude the hibernation file and swap file from processing due well to their dynamic nature and limited value for the backup. So if you want to back up these blocks, simply uncheck exclude swap file blocks through but actually they are not necessary for virtual machine startup, so you can keep by default. Veeam doesn't copy dirty deleted blocks to reduce the backup file size. Again, if required, you can uncheck exclude deleted file blocks. And for compression, you can make your choice. You can choose the compression level. Those are different algorithms that we're using. So that is the optimal, that is the LZ4, that is the default choice for its fast encoding and decoding and effective compression. The remaining two options is the dedupe free options. The remaining three options is the dedupe friendly and the Z library compression with varied parameters. Well, honestly, keep in mind that the compression level affects not only the backup speed, but also the recovery speed. And Veeam defaults to balance the backup size with performance and proxy CPU usage. And actually, it is advisable to keep default values unless you fully understand the changes. Veeam compression should always be enabled. However, when again using a dedupe appliance as a repository, it might be a good idea to disable Veeam compression. You remember by using the decompressed backup data before storing in the repository configuration. But in other cases, just keep it optimal, keep it on. And the storage optimization, that is the deduplication block size that Veeam uses for a job. And there are four settings to choose um, from 256 KB block size that is suited for slow or unstable links. But again, as a rule, the default settings provided by Veeam, being 1 megabyte the default, are designed to provide a good balance between the backup size and the performance of the backup job and the recovery job. So usually the golden rule is to keep optimal, to keep the default. And the backup file encryption, so that is encryption at rest. Um, to encrypt the backup file, you choose or add a new one password. And remember the enterprise manager? So if you lose a password, means you cannot recover data from encrypted backups, and Veeam will warn you about this. So it's a good practice. If you're using encryption on your backups, install enterprise manager. You can recover the data in case you lost or forgotten the password. To receive SNMP notifications upon successful job completion, you just check that flag, ensuring you have global SNMP settings configured and a receiver set up for traps. Email notifications, that is, so again, that requires the global email settings in the main menu, you remember. But if you want to send up a special email notification for that particular backup job, for the DBAs as an example, because they want to know, are we performing backups, you can create a separate email notification. And if you want to log backup details to a virtual machine attribute to the vCenter as an example, you can check the set successful backup details to this virtual machine attribute and enter the attribute name. Next one, vSphere, some options for vSphere. So um, to backup a virtual machine, a running virtual machine, we must freeze it for a couple of seconds to achieve a consistent state, particularly for transaction heavy application like databases to ensure the data integrity and data safety. And we're going to touch on that. We recommend using the Veeam application aware image processing for consistency that we're going to touch on the next section. But if that option is disabled or for any reason unavailable, you can use the native hypervisor questions tool. So for virtual machines without Microsoft Volume Shadow Copy support like Linux virtual machine, Veeam uses the VMware tools to freeze the file system before backup or before replication. Next one, the CDP. So for incremental backups, but by the way, for VMware, we use the change block tracking with hardware version 7 or later, which tracks changes in data blocks since the last job. And we got the same mechanism for Hyper-V that is called resilient change tracking. So keep it on. And the last option, if you want to reset the CBT before Veeam Backup and Replication creates active full backup, enable the reset CBT flag. And well, that's a best practice because the CBT reset helps avoid issues, for example, when CBT returns incorrect data. So when you perform an active full, it's better to reset the CBT just to be 100% sure that this backup is correct and integral. Uh, Integration. We covered that a little bit. So again, if you want to use integration with storage system, you enable backup from storage snapshot. You can limit the processed virtual machine count, and you can fail over to standard backup. To create a backup, but without hardware snapshot. And failover to primary storage snapshot, it's about, you remember the architecture when I have two storage arrays and I use the replicated snapshot as a source for my backup. Again, if something goes wrong with a secondary copy, I can use the primary snapshot to create a backup. And the last tab in the advanced settings is for that's for scripts that run on the Veeam management machine before and after the job. And these are, well, these are most commonly used for additional notifications in Teams, in Telegram, or maybe Slack, and so on. And we have a couple of scripts available on Veeam Hub for that. And also, you can choose to run a pre or post backup scripts either every certain number of sessions or on a specific days. Now let's talk a little bit about the consistency. So that is the guest processing. That's the guest processing step. Um, the most critical option here is the enable application aware processing checkbox. So which you can use to configure how Veeam will interact with the application inside the guest operating system to ensure its consistency. So all you get to do is enable application aware processing, and then we have a lot of different options. You can configure the application aware processing. In example, on the general tab under applications, you can choose require successful processing to hold the backup if I have any issues during the application of web processing. If I can't freeze my database, if the VSS writer for the micro, as an example, if the VSS writer is not operational or not in the stable state, so we can't create an application consistent backup, we will hold the backup. That's the first option. The second one, try application processing but ignore failures to ensure the job finishes, creating a crash consistent backup if there is an error. And the last one, I do not require application aware backup for that virtual machine, for that particular machine, so I can skip it. Next one. Um, Transaction logs. So if you want Veeam to handle the application logs, as an example for SQL or for Oracle databases, you can choose different options. The first option will automatically truncate the log after they've backed up. And but remember, if you're using another backup tool, maybe a native one, to perform backup or of the whole virtual machine or a database, select perform copy only, because this is crucial. If the database, as an example, is backed up by multiple tools, only one should handle the log transaction. That's it. And the last one, if you don't want Veeam, now jumping back again, if you don't want Veeam to process the logs, if you don't want Veeam to truncate the logs, choose the perform copy only option. And the last one, if you prefer Veeam to use persistent agent for application aware processing, enable the persistent guest agent option. And these agents use just a couple of specific ports for communication compared to the non-persistent components or the runtimes that we use by default. So again, that's a little bit about security. Let's explore some advanced settings for SQL, and we have a couple of options how Veeam should handle the transaction logs. So first of all, you can choose truncate logs to truncate the logs post successful backup, and the runtime components, persistent or not, they will wait for backup completion before truncation. And by the way, to be able to back up the SQL transaction logs, make sure that the database is in full or bulk logged recovery model. So if that's enabled, then we can process the transaction log. If not, that option is not available. Use the do not truncate logs option to keep logs intact. So after the backup, the logs are not truncated, and that is recommended for um, simple recovery model databases. And the last option, select backup logs periodically for Veeam to backup and store the logs with the image level backup and truncating the logs during the backup. So, and the log backup is a separate task for Veeam, one that will always be in a running state. So it's some sort of the sub-process that runs in addition alongside to the main backup job, which creates, so we have a backup policy that creates restore points image level backup, and together with it we have a separate task that copies the logs only, let's say every 30 minutes, 15 minutes, and that one doesn't require the snapshot to be created. You can set up the log backup frequency, so in minutes. So the default is 15 minutes interval, and you can define the log retention. So you can match the image level backup retention or specify a duration. So, well, something like that. So you can keep only the last couple of days with logs. And the same, I will skip those. We got the same options for Oracle databases. So if you want Veeam to keep the archived logs on the virtual machine, you can choose the do not delete archived logs. And it is recommended that you select this option for databases in the no archive log mode. And if the database is in the archive log mode, the logs may grow large and consume all disk space. So it is better to truncate them or back the logs periodically. And you can do it with Veeam as well. The same options we got for SQL. And for Postgre, we have inbuilt application aware processing, and you can configure the write ahead login file management. Again, you need for SQL, for Oracle, and for Postgre, you need a user with enough permissions to SA for SQL, super user for Postgre to get access to the database and to be able to um, connect to the database, truncate the logs, copy the logs, etc. So, and the same configuration for Postgre. You can back up the logs again periodically. You can exclude certain files and folders from a backup. So you can use the exclusion feature. You can exclude files. You can exclude folders. You can use wildcards characters such as asterisks. You can use question marks. You can use some environmental variables to complete the exclusion list, and the scripts, and those are the scripts that we launch before and after creating a snapshot. So for instance, we can use them to freeze, to suspend a database uh, with which we can't work natively, or maybe application that we do not support, or maybe the application that doesn't support volume shadow copy service. So you can use the pre-freeze script, and that one freezes the virtual machine file system and the application data to bring that to the consistent state before we trigger a snapshot. And the post-thaw script is that one brings the application and the virtual machine to the initial state. So, and those scripts are stored on the management machine, and when needed, Veeam pushes those into the guest operating system and executes them. Um, Guest file indexing and malware scanning on the guest operating system. So you can use that one for browsing, for searching, and single-click file restoration using the Enterprise Manager. And if you enable that flag, the file system is also checked for suspicious and malicious files. You can set up a guest interaction proxy to manage the installation of the runtime on the virtual machine. For connection to the guest operating system, um, we need credentials, and you can add new credentials or use the manage account credentials for that. And you can set up different credentials. You can specify individual credentials for individual virtual machines, and you can use the test now button to verify Veeam communication with the virtual machine using these credentials. So it's advisable to test the creds before you run a backup job, not to get any issues. And the schedule, so you can run the job automatically or not, daily, monthly, periodically. You can decide if Veeam should retry the failed backups, and during a job retry, Veeam uh, proceeds failed items only, and you can specify the number of retries and the interval between them. And we have the backup window, so you can set up a backup window and define the time interval when the job should complete, avoiding maybe some impact on production. But keep in mind, if the job runs outside, it will be forced to shut down, to stop. And at the summary step, finalize the backup job configuration, check it, and if you wish to launch the job immediately, check run the job when I click finish on the wizard. Uh, let's move on to the next chapter, that is the recovery. So we got the backup. Let's speak a little bit about the recovery. And there are currently over 100 different recovery options in Veeam Backup and Replication. So that you can use the right tool depending on the situation. And today we will go through some of them because it's too much for our session today. And those cover everything. I mean, you can start from the entire virtual machine recovery, And then you can dive deeper. You can launch the virtual machine right from the backup. You can recover individual drive files, folders from the guest operating system. We have application item recovery. You can perform P2V migration from physical machine to virtual. You can convert the backup into Azure or to Amazon. So we have that built in. You can export the content as a virtual disk. And we also have cross hypervisor recoveries, meaning that you can restore the virtual machine from VMware to Hyper-V to Nutanix to Proxmox and vice versa. So let's cover quickly instant recovery feature that allows you to launch a virtual machine directly from a backup file with the lowest recovery time objective possible. So you should use that one in an emergency where every minute counts and you need to resume the virtual machine operation, the application operation as quickly as possible. And because the time it takes to recover the virtual machine is essentially the time it takes to start the virtual machine, which is only a few minutes. And so the process goes as follows. So we have some issues with the virtual machine and we initiate the recovery session. Veeam mounts a data store on the selected ESXi host using the vPower NFS service. So that's an NFS client. Onto this data store, Veeam copies the configuration file and the descriptor file of the virtual machine being recovered. So the VMX, VMXF, NVRAM, and VMDK files, and this set of files is sufficient for VMware to register and start the virtual machine. Meanwhile, the virtual machine disks themselves, so the flat VMDK files, remain on the repository, and Veeam reads data from them as required, if required, through a special named pipe. And during the actual recovery, we don't copy these, but we just refer to them. And next comes the restoration. Next comes the registration of the virtual machine, because we have the configuration file of the virtual machine, and we can register the virtual machine. We create the snapshot of the virtual machine that saves all write operations, and we start the virtual machine, and it is running just in a couple of minutes. And to fully complete the recovery, the user, the admin, initiates a data migration process. So the actual data transfer starts when you start the recovery, and that is done using the storage vMotion or Veeam Quick Migration if the first one is not accessible technology. And that's one is applicable also to the backups made by agents, so for P2V conversion. Um, and as I told you, you have the option to recover various workloads to Azure, to Google Cloud, to EC2 instance. And before that, definitely you need to set up an Azure subscription, a deployed virtual network, and a storage account. And with that feature, you can recover your virtual machines, migrate on-premises workloads to the cloud, or set up a cloud-based test environment using your backups. Um, FLR, so that's about the ability to recover files and folders directly from backups, from replicas, from storage snapshots. And there is no need to extract the whole virtual machine image before recovering. So you can restore the items straight from an image level backup or replica. And you can recover files from different operating systems. So Windows, Linux, Mac, and during the during the Windows guest operating system recovery, Veeam creates a mount point in the. By default, we use the Veeam FLR folder by default to mount the virtual machine disks or physical one, by the way, from the backup or replica. And we open the Veeam backup browser or explorer showing the content of the mountain drives. And you can browse your files, browse your data, and recover those to the original, to new location, as well as you have an option for recovering the permissions only. And recovery of Linux machines is very similar, but mounting occurs to an auxiliary Linux virtual machine because we can't mount the, let's say, X file system or XFS file system to a Windows machine. Well, technically we can, but it is not supported. That's why we need an auxiliary Linux virtual machine or any Linux virtual machine within your environment to mount the file system and show you the content, and then you can perform the recovery. And we have built-in special tools known as Veeam Explorers to recover application items directly from backups or replicas, which better be created with application-aware processing enabled. And we do not have time today to dive into these tools, but keep in mind that straight out of the box, you can recover various objects from following applications: AD, SQL, Postgre, Oracle database. Where is Oracle? Ah, yeah, Postgre, Oracle, Postgre. Okay, it's on the same line. Exchange, SharePoint, um, OneDrive for Business, and Teams. That is for a separate solution we have. That is for Veeam Backup for M365. But keep that in mind that we have that as well. And it's look like that. I mean, all the explorers, they follow the same logic, they look and feel the same. You have a navigation pane on the left, and you can dive deeper, like I can, for Exchange, I can recover mailboxes, calendar items, notes, emails, attachments. I have compare with production button, etc. And I have an advanced find. So if I know what I'm looking for, I can easily find the item that is required for recovery. So I'm thinking maybe we will set up another session for recovery only because once again we have a lot of different options for recovery. Let's dive a little bit into full virtual machine recovery. So let's recover the whole virtual machine. The first step of the wizard, you can select the virtual machines that you want to recover because you can recover multiple virtual machines. By default, we use the latest valid recovery point. However, you can restore virtual machine to any state. I mean, I got a chain of full backups. I have incremental backups. I have a chain sitting on the performance tier. Remember the SOBR, and I have a chain sitting on the capacity tier, and I can choose any recovery point for recovery. At the restore mode, uh, select the restore mode, and we got three of them. The first one, restore to the original location, and that's the simplest one. I mean, the first option recovers the virtual machine with the original settings to the original place, leading directly to the reasons tab. So there are no additional options. I just want to recover that virtual machine to the original location, overriding the original machine if the original machine is still there. And for virtual machine restored to the original location, there is a checkbox, quick rollback. And that one uses the changed block tracking to identify and roll back only the changed data blocks necessary to revert the virtual machine to the selected state. Uh, Keep in mind that this option should be used only to issues if you have some problems with applications or user deletion, etc. So I mean, avoid using quick rollback for problems related to hardware, storage, power outage, etc. Because in that case, we can have some wrong information in the quick rollback. So that's only for software issues. Option number two, that gonna recover the virtual machine to a new location or with different settings, and we will go through that. And the last one is the stage restore, and that option executes a script on a virtual machine before the actual restore. So you can write a script that can be anything. You can delete some data, some sensitive data, you can update some software, you can, so that is usually used for GDPR when we need to recover a virtual machine or a physical one from the backup, and we need to delete some sensitive or personal data before recovering the virtual machine to a production environment. So that is stage recovery is about. So go through the recovery of a virtual machine to another location. We need to specify a host or a cluster where the selected virtual machine must be registered. We can select a resource pool, then we can select the data store, and you can choose different data stores for different disks. So I mean, you can store the configuration file and the actual VMTK file separately. You can do it. And when we do the recovery, Veeam defaults to the original virtual machine disk format. But you can modify that. I mean, um, if you want to change the thin to thick or thick to thin, you can do it while you recover it. The name, so the name, the folder, you can keep the original, but you can change the name of the virtual machine. You can choose the folder and decide if a virtual machine tags should be recovered. The network step allows you to map network from the source side to those at the new location or with different network settings if you change those. So I mean, you can change the network. Definitely you can disconnect. So another option is to disconnect the virtual machine if you prefer not to join any virtual networks. And the secure restore option, we can scan the machine data for threats using AV software or content scan, the Yara scan prior to production restoration. So for AV scan, just select the corresponding checkbox. And for Yara, tick the flag and choose a rule from the list. And the Yara rules must be present in the Veeam special folder. And then decide on the action for Veeam to take if malware is detected or if some suspicious content is detected. So option number one, continue recovery but disable the network adapters. Option number two, cancel the restoration if a threat is found and you prefer to stop the process. And you can tick the last flag, continue scanning all remaining files after the first occurrence, and that will keep the scan for the whole virtual machine, even if we have detected some ransomware, some anomalies, some suspicious files, etc. So let's scan the whole virtual machine. And the reason step. So provide a reason for recovering, and this explanation will be recorded in the logs and in the session history. And at the summary step, review the restore settings and click finish. And to boot the recovered virtual machine on the target host after restoration, make sure to select the power on the target virtual machine after restoration checkbox. Otherwise, the virtual machine will be in the powered off state. Um, as we approach the end of our training for today, let's dive a bit into the security. So, Veeam, first of all, Veeam includes an integrated tool to verify that your backup server, that the configuration of the backup server follows security best practices. And to initiate a security assessment, you should navigate to the home screen, to the home section, and select security and compliance from the ribbon. So that's a special button over there. And this action launches the security and compliance analyzer window where the security evaluation begins. And that one evaluates settings for both the operating system and for the Veeam configuration. So, and configuration parameters that match the recommended settings will display as passed, and the ones with not implemented status should be revised. So you should check those. And the recommendations, those may be applied manually or through an automatic script. We have a KB and we have a script for you, so you can use to apply all the recommendations or one by one, it depends. And security checks include a lot of different parameters, such as enabling Windows Firewall, disabling outdated TLS and SSL versions, enforcing MFA for the backup UI, using immutable or air gap media, among many others. Like, are you using the work group or a domain for Veeam backup and replication? Because our recommendation is to not to include the Veeam backup and replication into the working AD, but you can have a separate management domain for that or use workgroup. So a lot of recommendation, and that's a single view where you can just see, are you complaining with those or not. Um, let's take a look at some of the settings. So the most important is the MFA. So we offer inbuilt MFA for user verification using the OTP, the one-time password or a second factor. So improving the security against account compromise. So to enable MFA, you go to the Veeam UI as an admin. You go to the users and roles security and select the tick box enable MFA. And so how MFA functions? Um, the user signs in to the Veeam UI, and Veeam verifies if the MFA is enabled. Then if MFA is enabled but not set up, the user receives setup instructions and a secret key for initial configuration. And if MFA is enabled and already configured, the user must enter the digit code. That's it. Simple. Oh, sorry. Um, for eyes authorization, you can enable that one to minimize the risk of some impacts, unintended impacts on backup data and configuration. And this feature requires an additional admin role approval for certain operations. So as an example, with 4eyes authorization active, approvals are needed for operations such as deleting backup files, deleting backup repositories, managing users or user groups, changing MFA for users, and resetting the MFA. And so let's consider the following typical scenario. So um, a backup admin initiates an action like deleting a backup data. What happens next if 4eyes authorization is enabled and set up? I'm sorry, an approval request appears under pending approvals in the home section, and all the Veeam backup admins are notified by email. So if email notifications are set up that, hey, we got an approval, and another backup admin need to approve that request before Veeam will proceed with the action. Or we can decline, we can deny that if that's something, I don't know, unauthorized access, etc. So it's a good one. It's very good option. Um, with the latest build with the Veeam backup and replication 12.1, you can use native and external malware scanning methods to examine backup data for potential threats and identify suspicious or infected items during the backup process. So you remember we have post backup process like AV scan, like Yara rule check, etc. But we also have methods for checking the backup data stream on the go when we perform the actual backup. And this includes the malware detection within guest indexing data and data stream while performing the backup. So we check the blocks, we check for suspicious, we check for anomalies. We have backup scanning capabilities as well. So we create some kind of a baseline. So the first backup is a baseline, and then if on the subsequent backup we have some anomaly like, hey, uh, a lot of blocks has been encrypted or a lot of blocks has been deleted in that virtual machine backup, that looks suspicious to us, and we give you a warning, and that is called a malware detection. So it works on the fly. And after backup creation, there is an on-demand scan for malware. That is a separate feature that is available, and this allows you to scan existing backups for specific content if needed, or some malware. And we have a couple of options here, so you can find the last clean restore point, and that is just a sequential search from most recent backup. The second option is it's a binary search to reduce the number of scans required. And the last option is to scan all recovery points in a range to find some information, for example, some sensitive data. Additionally, you can schedule both the AV scan and content scan to run automatically within Sure Backup jobs. And you remember we have two options for that. We have a simplified version that doesn't require the configuration of a virtual lab, and uh, the first one that is a full-blown test. So for the second one, you don't need a virtual lab, so you simply add the backup job you wish to verify. And for AV scan, for content check, you just stick the corresponding flag. If you want the AV to continue scanning the virtual machine data after the first malware is found, select continue scanning remaining files after the first occurrence. And if you want to validate the backup file with a CRC check, you check the perform backup integrity check. Um, Veeam also uses we call it inline entropy analysis. So that's about the data blocks that we investigate during the backup for malware, for some suspicious files, etc. And it detects um, files encrypted by malware, and we trigger a detection event if encryption exceeds specified sensitivity levels. And we detect malware text anomalies such as ransomware notes, onion links, and etc. And this detection is integrated. It functions at the proxy level or on Windows agent level, directly analyzing the incoming data stream. And well, it is important, however, to monitor the CPU load on your proxy, as the detection process, well, might reduce the backup throughput if the system is already at full capacity. So keep that in mind. And Veeam uses file system activity analysis to scan guest indexing data for malware, and during the backup job, it detects the known malicious files and extensions listed in a special configuration file in an XML file found on the backup server, and files that malware has bulk renamed or bulk deleted. So if you have those, if you experience those, I mean, we will warn you, and we will tell you that, hey, you have a bulk deleted files on that virtual machine that looks suspicious for us, so please take a look. And we're now jumping to the tips and tricks section. Just several helpful, but maybe somehow hidden features when working with Vim backup and replication, and we get just a couple of them. So the first one is quick backup and Vim zip, and just two features. So the Vim zip, that is, with that one, you can quickly perform a full backup of a single virtual machine or multiple virtual machine without the need for a scheduled job. So each VMZip task creates a standalone full backups, and those backups will appear in the exported section on the home view. And with VMZip, you can create backup with just a few clicks. You just need to select, choose a destination, set compression level, encryption, application aware processing if required, and that's it. And you can initiate the VMZip from UI or using the PowerShell. Oh, by the way, you can use the vSphere web client from vSphere if the plugin is installed through Veeam Backup Enterprise Manager. And the distinctive feature of this full backup is that it does not become a part of the existing backup chain if you have a scheduled backup policy. And well, the primary purpose of VimZip is to create a one-time independent portable backup. So you can use it as an example for archiving old virtual machines. So maybe for some test service that, or maybe for virtual machine that been decommissioned, or you can use it for transferring, for sending a virtual machine for some testing. You need to send it to developer, etc. So something like that. And the quick backup lets you perform the on-demand incremental backup. So it's the same but incremental. And so again, we recommend to use those as a temporary measure, maybe before updates, bug fixes, migrations, etc., instead of using snapshots in your environment. Copy and move. Well, you can perform numerous operations with backups, such as moving, copying, deleting, exporting, completely removing from the repository or deleting from the configuration database, um, and other actions, especially if you have not configured the 4eyes authorization. And well, the moving and copying can be really useful when you manage the repository. So um, you can move the entire backup job to a different repository, or you can relocate a specific workload and their backup to another backup job. And this is really useful for managing the repository space. So you can move the backup to a new repository when one is full, redirecting the backup job to continue the backup chain. And copying of backups is useful when you need to duplicate the workload or the backup data on another repository. And it is important to note that these operations are block cloning aware. That means that if you are moving data, for example, from a ReFS repository to an XFS repository, because you want to move your data from ReFS repository that is mutable to a Linux hardened repository with XFS that is immutable, you can use the move operation, and the block cloning is not disabled, and we do not require extra space for like unpacking the data and then packing it up again. And I'd like to conclude our tips and tricks section by highlighting a very special utility for restoration, and it is called Vim Extract utility. And that is a standalone tool provided by Veeam for recovering machines from backups. And it might be useful in situations where you need to recover data, but you do not have access to the full Veeam backup and replication installation. And you have two options to, so that's just a standalone utility, and you can launch it. It has a graphical user interface, and you can use it through a CLI. And We're left with just a few final slides, so thank you for staying with us. We're almost done. As as a next steps, so we suggest taking a closer look at the whole Veeam data platform or features that you may not yet be using. And for this, we offer a hands-on labs experience. And the hands-on lab, that is a virtual environment we create for you upon request, where you can dive into different scenarios, click around, recover data, configure different solutions, and more. So it's a practical environment which can enhance your understanding with our solutions. And in the labs, you will find, well, everything: offsite backups, Veeam APIs, ransomware defense, Kubernetes backup, M365, orchestrator, etc. So you got the QR code, you got the link. So welcome to the hands-on labs, and feel free to use these labs to practice and to test your knowledge. In our session today, we covered the most important and fundamental aspects like architecture, proxy, repository, SOBR, jobs, a couple of recovery scenarios, malware features. But it's clear that it is simply not possible to cover the extensive feature set of Veeam backup and replication in just 4 hours. It's almost 4 hours. And again, thank you for being with us. Therefore, I invite you to attend a comprehensive 4-day course that covers absolutely all aspects of working with Veeam backup and replication. And this course provides the opportunity for full preparation for the VMC exam, should you be looking for that certification, because our today's session simply is not enough to cover everything and prepare you for the VMCE. And additionally, the course is delivered by certified and trained instructors, offering the flexibility of being available both online and on-site sessions. And the course not only includes theoretical knowledge like we have today, but also hands-on practical work in lab environments to ensure a comprehensive experience. And in conclusion, here comes a set of useful links that will streamline your work with Vim backup and replication. The first one, the calculators. So those are the tools that allow you to check the sizing of Vim backup and replication components to ensure that they meet your requirements, they meet your amount of data, the number of virtual machines, etc. The second one, the Help Center. This is the documentation for all our products, perfectly structured and excellently written by our technical writers. VBR best practices. These are the recommended practices for configuration, sizing, operation, installation, providing guidance for security and for optimal performance. The security digest, that is the operational security updates and patches to keep your Veeam backup and replication, enterprise manager, Veeam One, etc. installation secure against known and new vulnerabilities. And the last one, if you missed that one, you missed a lot. That's the community and the R&D forums. Uh, Here you are likely to find answers to any questions you might have, or post your own questions and receive a response. And because the forums are very active with a supportive community and Veeam employees. And these resources are designed to support you at every stage of your Veeam backup and replication journey and to help ensure best practices applied within your environment. And thank you. Thank you for your attention. Should you have any questions or require further information, please don't hesitate to reach out. In the follow-up email, you will receive the link to the quiz that we mentioned at the beginning of the training and which we're pleased to share with you now. And also, you will receive our contacts. So feel free to write us an email anytime. And you will receive a survey about today's session. And I highly encourage you to fill it out because based on your responses, we can make changes, add new content, focus on specific topics, or provide more depth in certain areas. Or maybe we'll got another session next month on another topic. Your feedback is extremely important to us, so please take 5 minutes of your time to complete the survey. And again, thank you in advance for your input. And until next time, take care. Let me just quickly put my contact to the chat. Yep. So if you got any questions, any follow up that you want to address to me, please feel free to write an email at any time. And again, thank you very much. Have a good one. Bye.